Hi guys, yeehaw, we're off.
Hey guys, welcome to the Sharpening Report. Hey, this episode's a little different. I ended up splitting it into two parts because it was such a long conversation. It was great, but it ended up being over 2 hours. So this week is part one, and if you want part two, then you'll have to pay me money. No, I'm just kidding. It'll be posted next week. But I hope you guys enjoy it. Again, this is with two guys from
Hi Diane, hi Tricky, hi Cactus, good to see you guys.
Hollywood, John Robertson and Bill Chapman. Absolutely incredible. The first part this week is all about their physical jobs and the physical world in Hollywood and how demanding it is and some things that they've interacted with on a personal level. And then the next week, part two, we get into the spiritual realm and the crazy things that they've interacted with the different orbs and spiritual beings and just some mind-blowing stuff that they've seen in Hollywood. So this week's all about the physical world, next week's all about the spiritual world, and then of course we wrap it up on a positive note. So hope you enjoy the show.
I didn't mean to put the moon in them emojis, Cactus.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Sam Johnson. We're found on YouTube, iTunes, and Blog Talk. Well, since 1911, Hollywood has been the platform for many messages sent across to the masses. Many people believe that maybe just for entertainment, but as we are beginning to learn that there is maybe more of a nefarious perspective to it. Well, with the rise of things like the Me Too movement and the ever-growing understanding of the satanic rituals involved on in Hollywood, well, we just have to be prepared. And we really have to check our sources when we're trying to find the
Straight off the bat with the jokes.
truth of what's actually going on. And there is no better source than going right to the actual source of Hollywood. And that brings us to today's interview. We are joined by John Robertson and Bill Chapman, who have spent careers in Hollywood. They know what goes on behind the scenes. They've been there, they've done that, and they have been delivered from that to share the message of the truth of what really Hollywood is actually all about. So, Mr. Robertson and Mr. Chapman, how are you doing today?
Great. It's a pleasure to be with you today, Sam. John, as always, joining you again as we've talked several times on different platforms. This is a real treat.
I really appreciate you guys coming on the show. Bill, can you give us some background on some things you worked on where you come from and kind of how you ended up in the Hollywood world?
Yeah, sure. Back in 2012, I relocated to Atlanta. I had been living in Knoxville, Tennessee, went through a divorce in 2008. And basically moved down to Atlanta in 2011, actually. And the company I was working for at the time, just for whatever reason, God kind of shut that down. And I took a job on a film through a mutual friend, a guy that I had met just casually. And he had another friend that was a sound mixer and had been working for Tyler Perry Studios and had been doing a lot of independent films. And he said, "Hey, I've got a friend that needs somebody that can just stand in and be a boom operator," which is the guy that holds a long pole with a microphone on it and tries to capture all the sound that's coming out of the actors' mouths. And so he asked me if he thought I could basically stand still, pay attention, show up on time, and he would show me how to do the rest. And so that's kind of how I got my start on a little film called In the Meantime, which was produced and directed by a guy named Roger Bobb. Roger Bobb started a company called Bobcat Films. He had previously worked for Tyler Perry as his first AD on most of the Medea movies in the early days and a lot of other Tyler Perry productions. And so I got my start on that film, but while I was working on that film as a boom operator, and I literally did not know anything. And if it had not been for a director of photography, a guy named Ross Seebeck, he basically just took a liking to me, and he said, you know something, buddy? He said, nobody just walks off the street onto a movie set and starts becoming a boom operator. And he goes, I don't know where you came from, but you're doing a really good job, and I'm going to try and help you. And so he showed me a lot of things about paying attention to where the boom was in relation to the frame, what the camera is seeing, so that you don't dip the boom down into what the camera is seeing, and also creating shadows when you're filming outdoors or standing in front of a light. All these little ins and outs, he kind of took me under his wing for this production of this movie that was later shown on TV.
It doesn't say how she died, Diane. Her brother died as well, apparently. So maybe they had a car crash or something. I don't know.
One, which is a kind of a Christian-oriented network. But as I was working on this film for a few weeks, I started noticing what the grips were doing. And the grips are the guys that are kind of like the little MacGyvers on set. They handle everything from lighting, rigging, shaping the light that's being shot onto the talent, background lighting. They handle camera movement, specifically the dolly grips, the guys that actually push the camera around with an operator sitting on the dolly, different things like that. And so I just really got interested in that aspect of film production. And so at the end of that film, I made a decision that I was going to leave my job in sales and I was going to join the film industry. And I joined the film union in Atlanta in early 2012, local 479 there in Atlanta. And through a series of just interesting, when I look back.
It sounds like a Diane if the brother died at the same time. I don't think that'd be the Vax.
On it, it was straight up a God thing, but just interesting meeting the right people at the right time and being in the right place at the right time. I got the opportunity to work on a film. Let me fill this in. From the movie In the Meantime, I got a job doing some rigging at Tyler Perry through some of those people that worked on that film. And then that kind of led to working on a couple of shows, Being Mary Jane, which was on VH1. And I kind of came up as a rigger. It was very hard to just jump right into becoming a set grip. So I went and I paid my dues as a rigger, which is a job where you're basically using a lot of tools and you're working with pipe, both aluminum and steel pipe hanging grid above the set so that they can attach lights to it. Rigging tents, what we call tents, where you might be shooting inside a house during the day, but the scene is actually at night. And so the riggers will basically build a tent around all the windows in order to keep ambient daylight from coming into the set. And so just projects like that. I spent about 6 months as a rigger and ended up working for a guy that had worked on the first 2 Hunger Games movies. And he told me that there was an opportunity to film a movie called Blended, which was with Adam Sandler and Drew Barrymore. And it was being filmed near where I lived up north of Atlanta. And he said, hey, this crew that I worked with on Hunger Games wants me to come and work with them on this movie Blended, but I don't want to drive an hour and a half to work. And you've been working for me as a rigger. I'd like to give them your name and see if you'd like to go work with them as a set grip. And so that was my very first kind of big opportunity. And so I got the job on Blended. Well, that same crew ended up doing Mockingjay 3 and 4, the last two installments of the Hunger.
I had not watched any of them Hunger Games at all. I think the whole concept was stupid. The plot was stupid.
Games franchise. So I worked those 2 movies, and then it just kind of, my career, when I say career, I was only in the business a little over 5.5 years, almost 6 years. But it just kind of took off. I started doing movies like Independence Day, Resurgence, Goosebumps. Right after Mockingjay, I ended up doing Goosebumps. I did lots of television work, Stranger Things, the originals, Vampire Diaries. I worked on a show called Godless for Netflix. And over the course of that 5.5 year career, I got the opportunity to work in Atlanta and also in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which is a hotbed of film activity as well. So the long and short of the story is, in 5.5 years, I ended up working on about 43, I think, different productions, and
wow,
lots of different people I came
hey,
in
Shawnee,
contact
good to see
with,
you.
lots of ups and downs personally, as well as in my walk with Christ, a lot of mistakes made. It was just a tough 5.5 years, and to leave the way that I did very abruptly was really the only way to get out, because it's kind of a merry-go-round lifestyle that you basically just go from show to show to show to show. And the minute you get on.
Are you still wearing enough layers to insulate Alaska? That's why you need the new and improved Bearskin hoodie, the 6-pocket Bearskin.
On a show, you know that the show is going to come to an end at some point. And so you have to start thinking, what am I going to do after this show? Because it's not like a regular day job where you go to an office and you know that as long as you don't mess up, you're going to have a job as long as this company stays in business. Well, film projects last anywhere from, on an independent film, it can be 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, to a long show like Mockingjay, where I was working with the same crew for almost 9 months. We filmed those 2 movies, Mockingjay 3 and 4. That took 9 months. And so that was an extremely long project, but they're not all like that. And so the job security, basically you go to work every single day and it's a job interview. You can be sent home immediately for the smallest mistake, for something that wasn't even your fault. And so it's this just daily anxiety of, what am I going to do after this? And so to just walk away from it was really tough, and I'm still adjusting. I've only been out of the business since November.
Yeah, and John, I know that you have a very similar story of just cutting cold turkey, and it's such a challenge, and I know you have a really great testimony behind that.
Oh, absolutely. Some dear friends of mine a few years ago reminded me, through the period of sanctification, not to draw on undue terms from sorcery, but it really is kind of going through the crucible, Sam, as Bill just attested to as well. But they used to remind me, no trial, no testimony. And that was certainly true in my case. It's really interesting. And Sam, I believe it's really a God shot how Bill and I came onto each other's radar. We have a mutual friend, and Sam, I know you're acquainted with Stephen Minking as well. Long story short, I found Bill on Twitter because he had a picture. His little profile picture was himself operating a
hey, rock and roll, welcome back.
And so that's kind of a unique picture to see. You don't see that very often on social media, and I identified it right away. And so I started following Bill on Twitter a few months ago. And Sam, every time I would talk to Stephen, and Stephen's a regular guest on the Hagman Daily Show with Joe Hagman and myself. He joins us every Wednesday in the bottom of the hour to do kind of a market update and some contrarian economics. Stephen he'd say to me every time we talk, John, have you contacted Bill Chapman yet? And I had not. I wanted to. It was just sort of down my priority list during a really busy period right after first of the year. So I believe, Sam, that God has brought Bill and I together to do some work for the kingdom. Bill and I were talking about it last night, and we know that the harvest is great, but the laborers are indeed few. And just to kind of touch on some of the parallels regarding Bill's opening remarks, I too,
Diane, that King Charles, wow.
got into the industry in a very unique way. And I think if you were to walk around a set and ask everybody through the different departments, how did you get here? How did you start, a life where you get up and go to Warner Brothers or Disney every day? I think you would get a different answer for every person on set. And so I was working in a restaurant in Beverly Hills. It was kind of a hot napkin deal type restaurant. It was right across the street from the Writers Guild Theater. ICM was 2 blocks down the street, one direction, and Creative Artists Agency was about a half mile down Wilshire Boulevard the other way. So very film-centric environment. I was a waiter and pulled some shifts bartend.
Diane, if that's true about King Charles doing the UFO disclosure, he's got to be the Antichrist, the Antichrist. There's no other conclusion you can come to with that Tim Cohen's Antichrist and a cup of tea. And if he's doing this, man, we are really there. We are really there.
As well. And I had a friend that worked in the restaurant, and he was doing little independent films. Bill mentioned a moment ago, sometimes you get on a project, it's like a 3 or 4 week run, oftentimes a non-union gig. And I knew this guy who was doing those type of projects. And I intentionally aligned, I liked him. I mean, we were legitimately friends, but I aligned myself with him because I wanted to experience, the on-set type thing. I had moved to Los Angeles 2 years earlier from the San Francisco Bay Area, where I lived in San Francisco, having written a screenplay that was ultimately not only produced, but distributed by Sony Pictures Classics approximately 9 years after we wrote the screenplay. And that was with the Polish brothers, with Michael and Mark Polish. So that script, my first writing endeavor as a collaborator, was actually made. And that motivated me, Sam, to move to Los Angeles. So I was in LA for about 2 years before I really got on set and started working in the industry. And there was a moment, I remember it was a Friday night, and I was supposed to go to what was called Res Fest at the Directors Guild the following Saturday. I had 2 VIP tickets. They were very difficult tickets to get. And I was going to take a friend of mine, and we were going to, at that time, Sam, this is 1999, early 2000, digital filmmaking was the big deal. Projects like Blair Witch Project had just come out and stole the...
Yeah, we busted Timothy Alberino yesterday, didn't we? Doing false info.
Show at Sundance, and the whole concept of guerrilla filmmaking and digital filmmaking was huge. The idea that much like what we've seen with podcasting and with platforms like Sharpening Report or the Hagman Report, it was a time where content creators had that financial tether severed so that we could actually start to create. And then, of course, what happens, and we've seen this happen in the new media as well, is that there's that fulcrum and it begins to tilt. Whereas it was difficult to create content with a very open marketplace, it flipped from an enormous amount of content in an oversaturated marketplace. And that's sort of where I entered the industry in January of 2000. My first project was for Rocket Science, which was a production company.
Wow, Aussie Diane, that's interesting. They're taking that on board as well. Wow.
Working under Fox. And it was a movie of the week about the 19...
Oh, I thought you meant Tim Cohen. Yeah, I know Timothy Alberino. I saw a redacted post that they said something about the Peru aliens, and I thought, well, it must be Timothy Alberino.
80s hit show Different Strokes. And this particular production company did 2 projects. The first was a 1-hour movie of the week about the Brady Bunch. And the second, the project that I joined, was about Different Strokes. So, I remember my first couple of minutes on set, I was immediately drawn to the hustle, the dynamic, the sort of the sizzle. I was able to identify very quickly that everybody there has a very specific task. And I remember thinking to myself, you want to be helpful. You want to be sort of the go-to guy because you're new and you want to make friends and show everybody that you're worthy of being there. But on film sets, much like the military, you actually need to stay in your department. That's very important that you let, for example, the grips do what they do, set deck does what it does, camera does what they do, and you really remain sort of departmentalized in that respect. Just to touch quickly on a couple of projects that I was part of that people joining us today on Sharpening Report will recognize. My first big break came when I got hired as a day player on Alias, the big ABC primetime show. I was I was on the show for all 5 seasons. I day played on season 1 and season 5, and was full time in the seasons 2 through 4. Worked around the entire set deck and prop world on Alias. That shot at Disney, and that sort of opened up the contacts that I needed to find myself shortly thereafter day playing on Catch Me If You Can, the Steven Spielberg, Leonardo DiCaprio film. It was interesting. This is kind of how Hollywood works. I went from working on Catch Me If You Can, which was the biggest film in town at that time, all the way back down to doing the last season of Power Rangers. And that's what Hollywood's like. On Friday, you're on the biggest show in town working for Spielberg. And then Monday, I'm in this, rundown warehouse in Santa Clarita doing the last season, the last American season of Power Rangers, which was called Wild Force. So I did about 15 years of production work with a 2-year hiatus in 2007 and 8, where I went and worked for terrestrial radio. I worked for the Salem Network and sold advertising for KKLA out of Los Angeles. I won't go into it, but I'd been injured and I had to recover physically, so I had to get more of a desk job. Worked in corporate America for a short time. And what happened, Sam and Bill, and I'm careful in saying this, but I really do mark it at December 12th of 2012. And we heard so much at that time around this community about the Hopi prophecies, the Mayan calendar prophecy. And I was pretty new to this environment back then. I had only been red-pilled for maybe 2 years at that point. And I didn't know what to make of all of it, but I knew that there was something to this December of 2012 environment, because just navigating around through Hollywood, I was working in Central Hollywood at the time at Hollywood Center Stages, which is a subsidiary of Disney, where they shoot all the Disney XD shows. And just driving through Hollywood to get back on the freeway and go home to Pasadena, the billboards changed almost overnight. All of a sudden, you were seeing projects coming that were sort of like Penny Dreadful on Showtime, or Salem, or Vampire Diaries, True Blood, the Saw franchise. I mean, you really saw, Sam, that Hollywood had sort of dropped.
With MYOB, you can do your inventory and accounting workflow all in one place. So the good news,
dropped that final layer of latex, and the mask was completely off. And I know that when Bill and I worked together on The Objective a few weeks ago, the title of that program,
this guy's actually interesting. I'm enjoying this interview.
About 2 Damascus moments in it. And for me, that late 2012 time was really a Damascus moment. I'd been praying, Sam, for discernment.
Wow, good term. His Damascus moment. Wow, that's a good term. I like that.
I was still very much a backslider then, and really still going through sanctification process now. But
aren't we all?
Amen. The Lord was really working on me at the time, and I think the tilt point, Sam, was when I began to pray something like this: Lord, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Frankly, I feel pretty lost. And wherever you need someone, put me there, and I'll do what you would have me do. And that's a prayer of surrender. That's a prayer that comes from a truly humble spirit. Now that it would be another year until I fully came spiritually broken back to the foot of the cross. I was still very willful, still working in Hollywood, probably dealing with a shade or two of arrogance. And the Lord was he was enveloping me in his grace is what he was doing. So much like Bill, I worked in feature film and television production for a longer period, but at the same level of shows. A couple other shows off the top of my head. I did the first Pirates of the Caribbean, The Black Pearl, day played on the first National Treasure, did a ton of network and cable shows that people would recognize, everything from 3 seasons on Pretty Little Liars. I worked on Big Love. I was thinking about it earlier today. I had forgotten I worked for about 3 or 4 months on the show Castle that everybody was so hot on back in 2014. Worked on Ray Donovan over at Sony. So I won't speak for Bill, but speaking for myself, Sam, the Lord placed me in this incredibly difficult environment. And I know one of the things that Bill and I aspire to do today here on the Sharpening Report is to try to give people a really good insight into what our day-to-day lives were like, because it is so tiring. It's so arduous. It's unbelievable, really. But I think, Sam, that what the Lord was doing is he was placing me in a position so that I would have the tools necessary to do what I do today, which is, again, completely by his grace. And he placed me in that position, and I knew, and it was a very difficult thing to figure out mentally and spiritually, but I knew that he was going to remove me from that place, that this was almost a temporary station, and that I was going to have to be humble and allow him to remove me from this. And I knew that there was going to be some pain. I knew this for about 2 years before my ignominious departure from Hollywood. I'd be happy to unpack that a little bit more as we get into the program. But in mid-September of 2015,
in case Big Mike's got a scar on his elbow. I'm not sure. I think it's his right arm, and he's got the scar when he's in the uniform. I think he was in the Marines. I'm not sure, but he's in an army uniform, and you can see it's him 100%, and you can see the wound on his elbow. He's still got the wound now. You can still see it.
I was escorted off the lot at Universal. I was working on the primetime show Superstore that starred American Ferrer of Ugly Betty.
Well, Shawnee, I've actually seen the parents of Obama's kids, and they look like the parents. Michelle and Michael and Obama, they just stole them kids.
Fame. And I had been doing these programs. I had been a guest on the Hagman Report and on Caravan to Midnight a number of times. And essentially I got caught whistleblowing on
Tim Alberino showed you.
the Luciferian machinations that are really the cogs and the flywheels that run Hollywood. Mm-hmm. And I'll pause there for now and give it back to you.
Yeah, well, guys, if you aren't sure if they are were involved enough to know what the truth behind Hollywood.
Yeah, that's what I saw, Diane. I didn't actually say it's the parents, but the kids look like the parents.
There's the intro for you. They were clearly really involved with Hollywood. So I'm so glad you guys are able to join us and really dive into the truth and find out, because it's so easy, especially in the fringe world, and not fringe world, to find out what's going on. You have things, you go to the extreme side of just the darkest, evilest things, and then you have the people who are like, oh, it's just all made up. And I think there's truth on the very dark side. So I'm glad that you guys are here to talk about that. So, but so as we go forward in our conversation, let's talk about the physical day-to-day life that you guys lived, and then let's also, near the end of it, let's wrap it up with the spiritual implications that we encounter with coming out of Hollywood, and then end it on what God's doing and how He's working on that. So I'll give it over to you guys to dive into what your day-to-day life was like in Hollywood.
Well, the very first thing that you as John touched on is you have to learn to navigate your way around set. You have to understand kind of the hierarchy of set leadership, all the way from the producers to the director of photography, the camera operators, the key grip, the gaffer or chief lighting technician. You've got set decoration. You've got transportation that moves everything that gets hauled around in a vehicle. You've got costume, makeup, hair, sound department, virtual effects, special effects. There's a ton of jobs on set. And as John pointed out, you have to understand not only what your job is, but you have to understand everybody else's job too. And so that you kind of stay in your lane, because with most of these productions being a union picture, there's this frame of thinking that if I go out and do someone else's job for them, I'm taking work out of their hands and thus decreasing their job security. So in the film industry, people are very protective of their craft. And you find that, except in just the most emergency, like my hands are closer to it than yours, and we're trying to keep this thing moving. Let me just take care of that for you. You never do that kind of thing without asking permission to do someone else's job. And I saw many a times where people stepped outside of their craft and really caused huge problems, especially around the camera. When you see grips trying to do things that are specifically camera operator or camera assistant tasks, things can go very badly. I've seen, cameras that cost.
Shawnee, post a link to Rise if there is one, please.
Well over $100,000 fall directly into the pavement because somebody wanted to put their hands on a camera and didn't know where to put their hands on the camera, didn't know how to secure it to the head which mounts the camera, and it ends up on the ground. I saw that happen more than once. That I've seen things like half a day's worth of work be accidentally deleted because somebody thought they wanted to mess around with digital cards, and there's just all kinds of things that can go wrong if you do not.
Yeah, it's not you, Tricky. It's the TV. It is jilting. It's not you, mate. It's them.
Understand what's going on set. But as far as the day-to-day lifestyle, everything kind of begins and ends with what they call a call sheet. And a call sheet.
And there you go. I think Wi-Fi's dropped out. Yeah, my Wi-Fi's dropped out. Hang on, guys.
To the director of photography, the camera operators, the key grip, the gaffer or chief lighting technician. You've got set decoration. You've got transportation that moves everything that gets hauled around in a vehicle. You've got costume, makeup, hair, sound department, virtual effects, special effects. There's a ton of jobs on set. And as John pointed out, you have to understand not only what your job is, but you have to understand everybody else's job too. And so that you kind of stay in your lane, because
Diane, I wonder if they copyright them guys.
With most of these productions being a union picture, there's this frame of thinking that if I go out and do someone else's job for them, I'm taking work out of their hands and thus decreasing their job security. So in the film industry, people are very protective of their craft. And you find that, except in just the most emergency, like my hands are closer to it than yours, and we're trying to keep this thing moving. Let me just take care of that for you. You never do that kind of thing without asking permission to do someone else's job. And I saw many a times where people stepped outside of their craft and really caused huge problems, especially around the camera. When you see grips trying to do things that are specifically camera operator or camera assistant tasks, things can go very badly. I've seen, cameras that cost well over $100,000 fall directly into the pavement because somebody wanted to put their hands on a camera and didn't know where to put their hands on the camera, didn't know how to secure it to the head which mounts the camera, and it ends up on the ground. I saw that happen more than once. That I've seen things like half a day's worth of work be accidentally deleted because somebody thought they wanted to mess around with digital cards, and there's just all kinds of things that can go wrong if you do not understand what's going on set. But as far as the day-to-day lifestyle, everything kind of begins and ends with what they call a call sheet. And a call sheet is what is given out every single day at the end of the day to the entire crew via email. And then they also, the production assistants, they produce hard copies of those things to pass out. And a call sheet will basically have all types of information on it, from the location for the next day's shooting, what time you're supposed to be there, or what is called your call time. It will have a list of what's being shot by the scene number, and then special requirements for those scenes from every department. For instance, if we're going to be shooting what we call day for night, it might say rigging grips to tent all windows, as we talked about earlier, you know, building tents. Or it could say special effects need to have an explosion, you know, when this action happens. There's just all types of instructions on the call sheet. And then it gives you a list on the back of the call sheet as to everybody that's on the call sheet for the next day's work. And as John mentioned, he said the term day player. There's two classifications of worker on a film set. One is being a company film or basically a full-time employee on that production. And then as the production needs arise, there are day players hired, or basically just think of a day laborer. If you were going to go down to a local labor headquarters and put your name in for day work, that's basically the same thing. You're not guaranteed tomorrow. And now you can become a full-time player very easily, a full-time company employee on that production very easily, from coming in as a day player and doing a really, really good job. But the call sheet. So for instance, Monday morning, you get a call sheet on Friday, and it says you're going to start work at 6 a.m. on Monday morning. So most of the time, for the really, really dedicated people in the business, they're going to show up at about 5 a.m. to figure out where everything is at on set, make sure all your materials, all your gear, everything you're going to need for the day is ready to go. Because when they say we're in, and that is the phrase that they...
No, rock and roll, I don't. I met him through Emerald Dreamer, yeah. I don't think he posts anything on Facebook anymore either.
More curls, the everything in between curls. John Frieda Dream Curls. Instant bounce, moisture, and crisp-defying control.
Is that they use when 6 a.m. comes, it's we're in. We're in.
Yep, we're in.
And that means that the train is moving and it doesn't stop. And so at 6 a.m., you're opening the doors to the truck, you're unloading things, you're getting ready to start filming. And then you're going to have basically a time at about an hour later when the cameras are going to start rolling. So, and it could be anywhere from 30 minutes, it could be an hour, and before the cameras actually start rolling. But in this little interim time, you're going to be having kind of on-set rehearsals, everybody getting their stuff ready, moved up to set from where the trucks are at. And so starting at 6 a.m., the day is going to go anywhere from 8 hours at a minimum, and I could probably count on one hand the number of 8-hour days that I worked, and those were all
the one Diane posted. Yeah, I already gave a thumbs up so I can watch it later.
Because of something like what you would call an act of God, like weather related, or something bad happened on set and had to be shut down. You almost always work a minimum of 10 hours, if not 12. And I've worked up to 18 hours a day, 20 hours a day on films. And it's just so people get an understanding of that is moving, as far as my job, especially as a grip, and John's job for sure as a set decorator, that's moving rapidly, carrying heavy things all day long with a 30-minute break for lunch. Now, occasionally you get a chance to just sit down and gather your senses for a minute, but all day long you have a radio in your ear, and there's different channels on this radio that you're monitoring, but each department kind of has their own channel, and at a moment's notice, somebody can come over your radio and say, hey, we need this now. Bring this in, bring in an Apple box, which is just basically a wooden box that people stand in, or we need to roll the Pee-wee dolly in right now. We're going on the Pee-wee. And that's just a name for one of the camera dollies we use, made by Chapman, which my last name was really weird being a dolly group. And the major manufacturer of dollies, there are two of them, Chapman and Fisher, and having the last name Chapman and becoming a dolly group was pretty neat thing in a way. But the schedule throughout the day, you can move. I've done 3 and 4 company moves in one day. If you're shooting on location, you may shoot in a bank first thing in the morning for a couple of hours. Then you pack every single thing up back on the truck, then you move 20 miles to a church, and then you're going to be out in a field or in front of a pond. Every single day is different.
Yeah,
and
those
so
are called company moves.
Companies on the move, or they would say so, like, we're on the wrong set. We're on the wrong set.
Yeah, if you're standing by on this set, you are on the wrong set. You are late to work, people.
Absolutely.
Bill, I'm gonna jump in just for a quick moment and kind of shade in a little bit of what you're talking about. So,
I'll do that. I'll do it, Di. If it's copyrighted, I can take it down.
Enemy's agenda. The purpose of this following video is to help cast down imaginations and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and by showing these examples, help set people free from the enemy's agenda. Well, hello folks, I hope you're all well. Today we're going to look at a couple of music videos which are quite popular in this culture today. The first one here is from an artist called Poppy, and the latter is going to be a look at a recent Beyonce concert. Now, I have said before in recent times that I'm not going to do any more deep analysis of music videos and of the occult symbolism and things, purely because I don't think it's healthy to go too deep into it, to focus too much on it.
Subscribed. There you go.
I certainly don't want to lead people down any rabbit holes. So this today is just a surface look at a warning about this agenda that is being played out in our culture. So this first one is by a musical artist called Poppy, and she keeps singing in this song about being set free. And you see here that there's some transhumanist themes. You see here that she's in a pod, and she's singing in this song the lyrics about being set free, because you can see here she's not free, she's in bondage, and she's also got this MK Ultra dual persona theme going on. Reminds me of the Bible verse in 2 Peter. They promise them liberty, but they themselves are slaves to corruption. So should we really be following artists like this who are promising liberty to their millions of fans, but really they are slaves, they are MK Ultra, they are part of this system of Babylon? And when she raises up her arm, you can see that she's got the stamp of the chip on her arm, on her right hand, on her right arm. And this horrible, evil, satanic figure, which seems to be overlooking the whole of this video. And you see that there again, she pulls down her sleeve, and you see that she's got that circuitry, that mark, that chip on her right arm. And she's in shackles there, in chains. And then it's a very strange video, but it comes, this satanic figure, demonic figure, then comes and brings to her a white horse. So she's seen walking around with this white horse. And this is where I want to connect to Beyonce, because Beyonce has been seen with the red horse of the apocalypse in Vogue on the front page just in the last few weeks. You've seen Beyonce posing on the front of the magazine with the red horse, a kind of mockery, a kind of sacrilegious stunt, but also pushing the agenda, the apocalyptic agenda that we see. And it says Beyonce turns up the heat. So the red horse in the book of Revelation is to do with war. It says Beyonce turns up the heat. Now, a little caveat here. Remember that these people are they're following and serving their master, the enemy. They are not in control. You know, the enemy kingdom can show things in society, but remember through all of this that these are not in control. Jesus Christ is in control. He is the one that opens the seals in the book of Revelation. God is one who is sovereign. He allows them to do what they're doing for a short time, which will come to an end, and God will destroy the works of darkness. So remember that
Susan, you should be glad that Buddha's temple's not there. You should be glad about that.
even if there is this sense of pushing these agendas in your face, they are not the ones that are in control. So you can rest easy knowing that if you are saved by Jesus Christ, he is in control and he will be your savior.
Amen.
And he will keep you to the very end. Jesus said, "Lo, I am with you always, even to the very end of the world." So then we come to this other depiction, and very recently this was in a concert by Beyonce, where she's seen riding on a glistening metallic horse, and she raises up above the crowd. Looks a little bit like the Rolling Stone going over, and then Beyonce appears in that, and you see her these orbs of light going around her.
Man.
This is pure witchcraft. You'll see in a second. It's Renaissance is the name of the tour, but this is pushing witchcraft and transhumanism, just in the same way as that Poppy video was doing. There's these themes of transhumanism. If you notice here going across, you'll see that there is an eye going across her body.
Realms of space and time, reality holds no power or control of my state of mind on my voyage to find a source to charge my inner being.
You hear those words she's talking about? Beyond space and time, and reality cannot hold her back, basically.
To find a source to charge my inner being.
Find a source to charge my inner being. So it's all very New Age stuff. I mean, it's right in line with the views of Helena Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, and that's what's playing out here, this Antichrist agenda, corrupting people through these rituals in the mainstream media, using these celebrities like idols.
Divine frequency as I tap my MPC, I find the Mecca.
And you see there the lights going across her and turning her into that metallic shade, and this then goes into transhumanism, the next level above human. I mean, we could talk about many philosophies that have probably led to this.
I was debating with my nephew on Facebook about evolution once, and he posted me this monkey up to the man, and he thought that was a big comeback. And I just said to him, "Where did the monkey come from?" He didn't like that.
Talked about Alice Bailey, Helena Blavatsky. You've got Nietzsche, who wanted that Uberman. And remember, the guy that is cited as being the founding father of transhumanism was a Jesuit. So yeah, the rabbit hole agenda, they're trying to lead you into this stuff. They're trying to normalize the absurd. They're trying to they're conducting a revelation of the method. Remember, they want to teach people these Luciferian views, these Luciferian doctrines. They're bringing them out in the open. So even with the truth movement, you have to be careful, even in the truth movement, because they actually use that as a way to initiate people as well. this is a very strange time to be in. But we see that there is an agenda of the enemy, and it's always anti-Christ and anti-biblical, false doctrines, twisted, inverted doctrines to magnify the enemy and to lead people away from the gospel of Jesus Christ. But we're here now on YouTube telling you emphatically that Jesus Christ is the truth. The gospel is the truth. He died for your sins. He came to this earth. He died for your sins. This is a spiritual battle. The enemy is trying to distract you, is trying to deceive you. And you need to know today that if you're not saved from your sins against a holy God, you have to come to him in repentance and faith, because this is real, folks, and hell is real. The devil and his angels will go to hell, or go to the lake of fire. But if you are caught up in this sin, if you are caught up in the...
And how come we stopped evolving, Tricky? How come we already stopped evolving then? I'm not going to play this one now. I'm just loading it because it looks interesting. Oh, so I get ads.
Aliens have been around since...
Okay.
About so with day playing versus being a full-time hire, Bill, one of the key takeaways that you mentioned is that you can sort of separate the pros from people who are new or who are going to kind of operate in an amateurish manner by how seriously they take day playing. Because I think I did somewhere between 140 and 150 projects. Bill, I know you did about mid-40s, something like that, which I actually did the math after our time on the objective, and that it almost works out, really, if you take the years and you kind of multiply it out. But I did, I think, somewhere around 140, 150 projects, and some of those might be 3 years on Pretty Little Liars. Others might be, 6 days on reshoots for some feature that shot in Atlanta and then came back to Hollywood for post-production and pickup work. But day playing is how you get most of your full-time gigs. It's very rare. You have to be pretty firmly ensconced in a crew that you've worked with quite a bit to get a call saying, okay, this is a full-time gig. You're going to, you start on the 23rd and don't make plans until next summer. It does happen, but most of my work came starting as a day player, pardon me. And then your department head gets to know you, you build that trust equity. And in the set deck world, you typically start off in either working. So my counterparts in the grip world, where Bill comes from, if I was set dressing, I would be working with the rigging grips. And so what it's like, Sam, is the company will put all their assets out to a location. Let's say this is a Monday and we're going to actually shoot that location on Tuesday or Wednesday. So construction, set deck, which is just short for set decoration, grips, electric, and transportation, and construction, they will all come out to wherever the location is, and they'll do the things they need to do. The grips may be rigging, as Bill mentioned a moment ago. We call it day for night or night for day. It effectively means if you're in a location, and see, in the TV production and film production world, they don't care about things like whether the sun's out or not. If you're in an interior and they can save money and move the call sheet forward by shooting that interior at 2 p.m., but it's full.
Susan, the key grip means he's holding the microphone up. He's a boom operator.
AM in the script, they just have the grips go outside and rig up speed rail and this black heavy felt stuff called duvetine, and they effectively make it night. Ironically, the only time we care about what the sun is doing is if it's a night shoot and we're fighting daylight. And that happens regularly, where you start getting yelled at 4:30 in the morning. We're fighting daylight. Let's go. Come on, people. Let's go. Chop, chop. But anyway, so day playing is how you score a lot of your full-time gigs. And typically in the set deck world, your department head is going to put you out on the trucks first. They want to get to know you. You're going to be out. You may have a 6 a.m. call at Disney, but they may throw you on a truck and send you out to Vasquez Rocks or out to the high desert somewhere in LA. And it's really good training if you're kind of preparedness minded, as I am, I don't particularly like the word prepper too much, but it trains your mind that way. There's almost a militaristic training, Sam, in showing up not really certain where you're going to end up. You may be working in a closed off part of the Los Angeles County sewer system, or you may be up in the high desert in arid, dry wind and the heat and everything. So you have to kind of rig up your tools and rig up your backpack, your day pack, uncertain of where you're going to go. And then in the set deck world, once you've got that trust equity in the bank, I
like that little wooden cathedral behind his head there, on his right side of his head. Yeah, I like that. It looks nice.
Made it clear to the lead man and the set decorator, who were my superiors, that I was an on-set dresser and that I did props, because I typically wanted to get off of the rigging side of things and get with the shooting company as quickly as possible. That was my preference for a number of reasons, most specifically because that's where the actual rubber meets the road. It's amazing, Sam, but nothing in the entire landscape of television and feature film production means anything unless it goes through that little 2.5 to 4 inch piece of black glass. That's the only thing that matters, is what goes through the gate of that camera. Everything else is secondary or tertiary. It's in support of that content that comes through that lens. And that's why I think that people like Bill Chapman and myself have a specific charge to keep here in early 2018. I believe, Sam, that there will be a lot more people expatriating out of Hollywood. And I say Hollywood colloquially. I worked in the actual town of Hollywood. Bill worked out of Albuquerque and Atlanta, but Hollywood covers all of that. It's Hollywood as far as the production definition. The way it works is, and this has happened to me many times. I might be out with the rigging crew on a Monday, and then by Wednesday, when they're shooting that location that could be anywhere from 25 to 60 miles from the studio, I might be with the shooting company, and that can really mess up your head and your physical well-being, because you may be waking up at 4 a.m. to make a 6 a.m. call at stage when you're working with the set dressers who are going to go out. The camera's at some other location. You're just out there putting the location together for the shooting day that's coming up. And then when they switch you over to company, they just call it, you're working either with rigging or pre-production or company. When you move over to company, they may be on splits where your call time is 3:30 p.m. And all of a sudden, in a compressed 48-hour period, you've gone from waking up at 4:30 a.m. and taking a shower to standing on a set at 4:30 a.m. and you've still got 2 more hours to work. And then you've got to somehow safely drive yourself home. And that kind of stuff happens all the time, particularly when you're day playing, if you're jumping from the rigging side of things or the wrap out side of things over to production. The only other thing I want to mention is one of the unique things about the industry we came out of, as we speak about nuts and bolts, and I think we can move on from this momentarily, but we build these enormous, what we call base camps. And it's true. There's an old cliche in Hollywood. It's kind of a joke. You ask the new kid, what really runs Hollywood? And somebody will say, oh, well, Gwyneth Paltrow or Harvey Weinstein or Jack Nicholson. And one of the old guys will be like, no, it's actually gasoline. And it's true. The transportation department, the Teamsters and the Teamster local that drive all of the equipment, they drive everything with 4 wheels on it. They are actually what moves Hollywood and makes Hollywood happen. And so, Sam, if you can imagine this, an empty parking lot or an empty field next to maybe an abandoned school or an abandoned jail or something like that where we're going to shoot. And within just a 1 to 3 hour period, as many as 50 transpo guys will bring out, every department has a trailer. Some of them are kind of more unique than others. The grip trailer is very mechanical looking with sheets of plywood and speed rail and clamps and clips. And it kind of looks like a cool MacGyver hardware store. The hair and makeup trailer, when you walk through the door, it looks like you're in a salon, So these trailers are department specific. And on a big show, you can have 15, 20 trailers out there, no problem. Then, of course, there's the portable office buildings that come out for production. You've got all of the stake bed trucks that do rounders and run around. There could be 10 to 12 golf carts out there, side by sides, Rangers, Polaris, you name it. And these base camps can be ginormous. I mean, they'll bring out the generators with the big lights on them. And I've been at base camps that were 4 to 6 square city blocks. I mean, really huge, where you almost need a map just to get around base camp, which is typically very near the location you're shooting. So it's a unique place to be, Sam. But believe me, once you've been doing it for a couple of years, it starts to really wear you down. And at first, that sort of razzle dazzle dynamic, it's very magnetic, and you're drawn to it. And then there's all of these sharp ironies in film production work, where the very thing that drew you to it is starting to be the thing that you can't tolerate, that you hate. It flips on you. And I think that we could almost use that, Bill, as a segue into maybe some more of the spiritually defining stuff that we've experienced, because I would submit to everybody today on Sharpening Report that my Hollywood experience was, I think, like any other experience when you are working, albeit not willingly per se. I never sat down and said, gee, I think I'll go work for the devil. I just was looking for a better job than being a bartender or a waiter. And that's how it is for most people that are on the cruise. These are regular, decent people, Sam. They're just people who are collecting a paycheck and trying to take care of their families. I bristle a little bit at the idea that everybody in Hollywood is, worshiping the devil or whatever. That's not true. Most of them are just ignorant. They're lost sheep is what they are.
Wow, that's pretty deep.
But when you start to work in the devil's environment, he is going to flip the script on you. I read something a week or two ago that I thought was a brilliant analogy. I can't remember who was making this commentary, but they said, look at how the devil operates. It's the heroin junkies that are pursuing the ultimate high are the ones that Satan will come in. He's a counterfeiter. He's a thief. He flips the script, and they're so dope sick, writhing around in bed without the drug, as to be dysfunctional, and you basically want to die. So you come into this, with that example, looking for this high, and what do you get when you mess with the devil? You get dope sickness and on the edge of death. And for me, that's what happened in the 15 years I was in Hollywood. Is much of what was so attractive at the outset became repugnant and repulsed me, Sam, toward the end.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. Your eyes are bigger than your stomach sometimes, and when you get involved with things, you start to see the reality behind it, and it's very...
What's his eyes at the end? There's a part 2 to this. Okay. That's part 1. Part 2.
Hopefully, Sam, that gives you kind of an instant.
He's getting to the spiritual side of Hollywood now. About time.
Hello, welcome to part 2 of 2 about the two guys from Hollywood, John Robertson and Bill Chapman. Again, this is the second part of the series, so if you haven't seen the first part, make sure you go back to last week's episode and watch that. It's all about their day-to-day lives in Hollywood. This one's more about the spiritual aspects and things like that, so definitely take a listen. Make sure you get a good background on what we're talking about from part 1. Hope you guys enjoyed the show, and I'll see you next week. So let's dive into the spiritual aspects that you saw, and then also
that music is actually annoying.
Well, I'll save that question for it. So what? Because we hear about these just awful human sacrifices, satanic rituals, constantly going on in Hollywood, and everyone's involved. Maybe and by what you said earlier, I mean that's not entirely true. Not everyone's involved with it. But what kind of satanic activity did you see on your sets?
I know one of the very first things that I noticed, Sam, after I'd been in the business for a couple years, I got an opportunity to work on a show called Constantine. And Constantine was a television show that basically talked about this guy that's kind of possessed. And this is a disclaimer, I very rarely watched anything that I worked on, because once you've worked in the film industry behind the camera, you cannot watch a television or a motion picture ever again the same way. It is almost impossible to enjoy it the same way as just a regular person that just goes to the show to see it for the first time, because you remember how it was made, you remember all the little tricks that are done to portray things on camera. But I remember working on this show Constantine, and this one particular day, and this was in 2014. I didn't get out of the business until late 2017 in November. And I remember this day where we shot all day.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me, Tricky.
Really set up, kind of looked like the Devil's Lair. It was, if people that have seen the show, and I hope not a whole lot of people saw it, because it really was a satanically focused show. But it was in a set that was kind of set up like a Devil's Lair, kind of an underground laboratory, kind of steampunk, with lots of gears and piping, and we literally filmed the main character of that show walking around when I say all day, I'm talking about we shot from like 7 a.m. till 9 o'clock that night, with a 30-minute break for lunch, with this guy basically dressed what I would visualize Jesus was dressed like on the cross, wearing kind of a swaddling clothes around his waist, like, to simulate like underwear, basically just a rag around his waist, covering up his private parts, with blood all over his body. And the only dialogue that the guy said all day was basically these really kind of creepy satanic noises, what was like a mocking of the speaking in tongues that we see about in a lot of charismatic churches. It was just a creepy day. And that was one of my very first experiences after having been in the business for a couple of years. And it really shook me. I mean, I remember going home that night and thinking, what did I just do? What did I just help do? And so, I'm looking at my IMDb right now, and I'd forgotten a lot of these shows, but I worked on, Stranger Things, completely show focused around, the occult and psychic abilities and divination and all these just ritualistic stuff, the Originals, Vampire Diaries, things like The Fifth Wave. I did a pilot called The Paranormal Project, speaking to the dead, lots and lots of stuff, a show called Godless. And at that time, I'm out in New Mexico, and I was really struggling with my marriage, made some horrible mistakes, and God just got a hold of me, brought me back to Atlanta, and I ended up working on a show in Atlanta called Superstition. And that was a show that's on Sci-Fi Network. I don't even know if they got picked up for a second season, but that show was really all about the occult practices of this family that runs a funeral home. And there's lots of things like bloodletting and tarot cards and seances and all of this just basically demonic subject matter that began to overtake me as a person. I've begun to just dwell on it, to the point where my family thought that I was possessed, because it's all I could talk about as a believer, having been saved when I was a young boy. And like John talks about, we all backslide. I was a backslidden Christian, but once you've made that decision to accept Christ, it never leaves you. You never lose your salvation. And always in the back of my head, I knew what I was doing was just helping to glorify the adversary, helping to glorify Satan. And so that was kind of my last straw in the show Superstition. But just to touch back on the physical demands of the job, and John made a great point about the scheduling of going from working this particular shift and then being sent over to work with the shooting crew. You start at 6 a.m. on a Monday morning and you go for, say, 14 hours. Well, then there's what they call a turnaround time, which is the amount of time that is guaranteed for not only the Teamsters, yourself as part of the union, but also the talent.
Cactus, they give money, they build infrastructure in the African countries, and when they can't pay the debt because it's too high, they then take over the asset. They completely take over ports, highways, train systems, the whole lot.
Is given a certain amount of time that they have to be off. I mean, think of a truck driver that is forced to take a certain amount of time off between driving shifts. It's really the same type of thing. So a week-to-week schedule might look something. If you come into work at 6 a.m. in the morning on a Monday, after you've worked that 14 hours and then that turnaround takes place, you're going to come in on a Tuesday at maybe 8 or 9 in the morning. And then Wednesday, it's noon or 1 p.m. And then Thursday, it's 2 or 3, maybe even 4. And then by the time you get to Friday, you're going to end up going into work at 5 or 6 p.m. and working past midnight into Saturday. And in the industry, we always call that Fratterday, because you're working partially on Friday and into Saturday. And then you get off of work at maybe 5 or 6, in the morning on Saturday, as the sun's coming up, because it's no longer dark outside. You're filming overnight most of the time. And then you spend all day Saturday just trying to recoup, sleeping all day Saturday. And then you wake up, at 2 or 3 in the morning, Sunday morning, and you're like, okay, I'm hungry and I'm awake, but nobody else in this house is. And then Sunday you're walking around like a zombie, and then you start all over again on Monday. And so for 6 years, and then for John for 16 years, it's this cycle of just rotating around the clock, and it destroys any aspect of your family life. Especially, with me, I had a wife and 2 stepkids.
And Tricky, don't go where I know you're going to go that camel breath.
And it took a real toll, because you're never available. And when you are at home.
Yeah, she's always giggling like an idiot, isn't she? As though she smashed on pot.
It's all about getting to bed as quickly as you can, because you may have driven 2 hours back, from set back to your house. And, you only are off 8 hours between shifts. And so 4 hours of that's in the car. And then you get home and you've been drinking coffee or Red Bull or just, stuff to stay awake while you're at work. And it took a toll. I mean, it literally put me in a point, not only with the spiritual attacks from the subject matter I was having to stay at all day long, whether it's, bestiality, witchcraft, promoting, the alternative lifestyles, promiscuous, all of it just began to weigh on me mentally and spiritually. And then the physical demands of when they say we're in, if you're lagging, you're going home, or you will not be called back the next day. And so it's 110%. As soon as they say we're in, you better be giving it your 110%. And don't get caught sleeping. Do not get caught dozing off. Or not only are they going to clown you and make fun of you, you're probably not going to get called back.
There's a saying in Hollywood. There's a saying in Hollywood: if you're not 15 minutes early, you're late.
Absolutely. 15 minutes early is 20 minutes late, or something like that.
They play hardball on the Atlanta side of things. But Bill, I can so appreciate the sort of personal insight that you've offered. And what I'd like to do, Sam, per your suggestion, is kind of talk about some of the the spiritual things that I saw that were particularly dark. And I think I'll start with.
Okay, this is why I wanted to watch this show. I wanted to hear the spiritual side of things. So this is going to be interesting.
With the more deceptive ones, because Sam, I was born, I like to joke sometimes, I was in church 9 months before I was born, and it's true. I was one of the truly blessed among God's children, in that my parents literally had me in church, swaddled as a little baby, and I was born into a Pentecostal family that was with the Assembly of God Church, or maybe full gospel churches back in the 1970s. And I think I'm either fourth or fifth generation with the Pentecostal Holiness Church, going all the way back to the Brush Arbor days in the 1920s and 30s, out of the Ozark hills of Arkansas and Oklahoma. So much like what Bill described, I first gave my heart to the Lord when I was 7 years old, and I think that was a clear moment of recognizing Jesus Christ as the Christ. But at the same time, I was 7 years old, and I had to have numerous times in my life where I reapproached the cross. And then the last time that the Lord really dealt with me, it wasn't a reapproach. It was more like a crash landing at the foot of the cross. So the reason I say that is to contextualize the following, which is, as I listened to Bill speak, I was thinking about my time on Pretty Little Liars. And Pretty Little Liars, I did the back half of season 1, all of season 2, and all of season 3. ABC production, but it shot at Warner Brothers. And I didn't recognize it, Sam, at the time per se, but the entire plot device of that series was about this girl who dies prior to the beginning of the series and comes back and visits them in spirit form. And then this unknown character that they called A, and A was still a mystery when I left at the end of season 3. But there was this unknown that comes in and messes with their lives. And as the title of the series indicates, Pretty Little Liars, what drives every single script is that these 4 primary characters lie about everything, and the web gets so tangled. That's what drove each of the plots every week. But when I worked on Pretty Little Liars, I didn't recognize it at the time as like, oh, I'm participating in evil right now. But when I look back on it, with it being 5 years in the rearview mirror now, I think about all the time that we spent in actual real cemeteries or fake graveyards that we cheated on the back lot of Warner Brothers. We even went to a cemetery at one point in Pasadena and opened up a grave, threw the camera down there, and shot point of view up from the bottom of the grave. I didn't have to get down in there, only the camera operator and the DP did, director of photography. But that would be sort of the controlled kind of conditioning aspect. Remember,
G'day, Chris. Good to see you, mate.
It's not just the audience, the global audience that consumes the Hollywood product that's undergoing the controlled conditioning, but it's in fact the crew and the talent are also extremely susceptible to the controlled conditioning mechanism, which is one of the primary motivating factors of Hollywood and has been since day one. And if viewers of the Sharpening Report would like to hear my sort of historical timeline of how Hollywood came about, they can find it either on YouTube. Just type in Hagman Report and look for my debut appearance on the Hagman Report back in June of 2015. The title of that show is Hollywood is a Death Cult. And I described the beginning era of Hollywood in that. Or they can find a piece I did in July of 2015 on Caravan to Midnight with John B. Wells.
Hang on, what did he say?
Appearance on the Hagman Report back in June of 2015. The title of that show is Hollywood is a Death Cult. And
The Hagman Report, Hollywood is a Death Cult. Wow.
Describe the beginning era of Hollywood in that. Or they can find a piece I did in July of 2015 on Caravan to Midnight.
Wow, that looks good.
With John B. Wells. But back to my point. So the controlled conditioning happens whether you're in front of the camera,
You couldn't help it, could you?
behind the camera, or you're part of the audience writ large consuming the content. And so whether you're working, for example, I worked on some of the CSI franchises. I worked on CSI Vegas as a day player, and then several years later, toward the end of my career, I worked on CSI Cyber. And there was a time in 2014 where I was day playing. I was working full time, but I was doing so by day playing on 2 different shows. I would either be on State of Affairs with Katherine Heigl at Universal, or I would be on CSI Cyber, which shot at CBS Radford in Studio City with Patricia Arquette. And both of those shows are not particularly satanic or demonic, except that both of them are that slow kind of Overton window Hegelian dialectic momentum of getting the consumers of the program to accept the entire Big Brother concept, the entire social surveillance grid that we're literally building around ourselves as we divulge our entire lives on things like Facebook and Twitter. And so even, I would argue, I would submit that even that controlled conditioning aspect is Luciferian in the sense that without that acceptance by the masses who tune into shows like CBS Cyber or State of Affairs, the beast tech system cannot be brought into society as a whole. But there are a couple other stories I'd like to tell quickly, gentlemen, that are directly satanic in things that I witnessed. And the first was, oddly enough, it was a little indie project that I worked on during a hiatus period. I was already doing pretty big productions at the time, but I needed some work. We were on hiatus from Alias. And I worked on this show for just a couple of days. A church in LA somehow put together $750,000, and they were shooting a film about demon possession. And it was really strange because nobody on the shooting company or the crew was particularly Christian, but I guess there were some people from the church there because that's where the money came from. But I was the on-set dresser watching actors pretend to be demonically possessed. And then at the end of my first day on that show, it was the only time I've ever seen them do a burn on an actual stunt person. So they put a Nomex suit on with, wrapped up completely to here. And then they have this Nomex paste that goes on their faces, and then special effects lights them on fire. And in the scene, this person is immolating, and they come running out the front door, and they collapse on the front lawn and roll around, and then special effects comes in from off camera and blasts them with the fire extinguishers, and that's the scene. And that's got to be a one-off. That's a one-take deal when you do something like that. But I remember thinking at the time, I just had a spiritual check about being in this bedroom of this home in South Central LA, watching an actor pretend to be demon possessed. I had experienced a demonic moment when I was 19 years old at my grandmother's house. So I knew that that's real and it's very serious. So to watch an actor pretend, it was disconcerting. But the second story is one that I shared with Doug and Joe Hagman again on that debut broadcast, Sam, from back in 2015. And I was on a show. It was early in my career. I think it was 2001. It was a non-union show, and the production kept changing the script. So they were putting our production designer, who is the absolute top of the entire visual department environment. So you've got production designer, then art director, set decorator, and that's kind of how the chain goes. Our production designer, who was a very talented lady, was getting rewrites at like 1 o'clock in the morning, and they were expecting to have full 3-dimensional sets up ready to be shot 360 the following day, which isn't, oftentimes it's impossible to do. So the production designer was getting caught by no fault of her own without having sets camera ready. And in Hollywood, excuses don't really get you too far at all. But there's a difference between an excuse and an explanation. And to this day, I stand firm in the...
In case you didn't get it, Tricky, that you always had the power to behave. That was the next line after Dorothy said, I really do. I do. No, that wasn't. Yeah. Hang on, I got that wrong.
Fact that this woman was not lax or remiss in doing her job. She was being given rewrites at 3 o'clock in the morning with no turnaround time to bring the sets in whatsoever. And we were working on the interior of an architect's apartment. And if you ever go on, there are stages in Hollywood that are not owned by the 6 major studios. They're privately owned. And when you go in these enormous 20, 30,000 square foot environments, Sam, you may walk into a courtroom, then you walk down the fire lane a little bit, and there's interior operating surgical theater, interior hospital room. Then you meander down the fire lane a little bit more, and there's a couple of jail cells. And then as you get to the back, there may be an apartment set. So there's all these interior sets under one big roof. And there's several of those environments in LA. We were on one of those. We were at a place called Dos Carlos Stages, just east of downtown. And I saw a producer, a very well-known producer, who had just come out of a major scandal where he had impregnated an A-list actress, a big time, very well-known actress. And they had gone through this massive paternity scandal just a few months before this event that I'm about to explain happened. And this guy came onto the set. So we're dressing the set. Camera's going to come in at it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Camera's going to come in about 5 p.m. So we've got all hands on deck. We've probably got 8 to 10 set dressers in there, literally hanging art on walls that are still wet because paint just walked off set 20 minutes ago. That's how bad this was, trying to hang drapes on wet walls. And this man began to dress down, to berate this production designer gentleman. And I haven't told the story, I haven't told it since the Hagman Report broadcast, but something happened to this man. And I can't use the language, nor do I care to, that he used toward her. But it was the kind of denigrating, dehumanizing verbal assault. This was not a couple of 4-letter words. This man was becoming unhinged, and he was using profanity all laced together in a way that would make a sailor blush. And I grew up with a single mom, and I began to feel, my blood started to boil, and I was probably 28, 29 at the time. And I locked eyes on this guy, and I really thought, I might wind up getting in a fight with this guy. And this guy was a very big man, and he's also one of the executive producers of the show. Like, I'm here and he's way up here. Mm-hmm. And as he screamed at this production designer, and she stood there and she remained so poised, but tears started to roll out of her eyes. Her eyes started to leak, but she wasn't weeping. It was uncontrollable, just tears. And I felt so sorry for her. And he looked at her, and he looked at me, and he looked at her, and this happened a couple times. And I intentionally locked eyes on him. I was younger then. I was dogging this guy. And
good on you, mate.
And for a split second, I saw his eyes shape-shift, change. I know it's kind of Hollywood cliche, but I actually, Sam, saw his eyes appear for a brief second like there were no eyes there at all. And I believe that a spirit, some form of Leviathan spirit, overtook that man for a few moments there on set that day. And he and I exchanged words. It got very heated. I maintained my composure, but I picked up my tool bag. I was full-time.
Hang on, Chris, I'll get the link.
Show, but I just had a couple of small ditty bags there, and I picked up my tools and I walked off set. And it was a memorable moment because I thought I was just walking off my job. But so I had to go from the back of this enormous stage environment all the way back up to the front elephant doors. And then I came outside. You've been in the dark for a long time. You can't see for a couple seconds because your eyes are adjusting. And I'll never forget, I turned around and I looked behind me, and there were about 15 or 20 other employees of the film that had all opted. They'd all seen this transition happen. And there was construction, paint, a couple of transpo guys, all the set dressers, all the prop crew as well, the hand prop guys. They all walked. So there were about 20 people that made a mass exodus off that production at that time. And lastly, the other thing that I'd like to mention about the sort of the spiritual underside of working on production, I mentioned this when Bill and I did On the Objective as well. There's this notion among people who do not have the discernment that the Holy Spirit will give. Now, we know that discernment is sort of is formulaic in the sense that, as Bill said a moment ago, you need to be sealed in your salvation in order to have the discernment of the Holy Spirit. You can't reverse those. You can't have the discernment as if you're still lost, if you're still outside of the blood of Christ, right, gentlemen?
Amen.
So I think a lot of the population in this country, and this is clearly demonstrated by the popularity of these cable shows that do the ghost hunting thing, they believe that when you see these kind of orbs of light, and a lot of times you'll hear people dismiss it as like a sundog or a flare effect on a camera lens. But when you work on a production company, there's oftentimes many people in many departments that are taking still photos for continuity purposes. So whether it's hair, makeup, wardrobe, that are taking, photos of the talent so that they can match the garb, match the makeup composure the following day, or maybe a week later when we're back in that day on the script. Or whether it's myself as an on-set dresser simply taking pictures of the environment so that I can redress the set properly and it cuts together in post-production. There's a lot of photography going on, whether it's just snapping pics with an iPhone or digital cameras, 10, 15 years ago. Over the years, I began to meet people, Sam, who were capturing these sort of little orbs of light. And, you see it one or two times, you dismiss it. Whatever, it's a key light, it's a source light. It's just a camera trick. But when you begin to see it often, you start to kind of scratch your head, and people dismiss it as, oh, well, that set must have been haunted. And there's this whole sub rosa sort of culture in the film industry of the haunted sets. And I know, Bill, you and I have never really talked about this, but I'm sure in Atlanta and Albuquerque, you have the same thing, because in LA, it's huge. Whether it's an abandoned hospital or a defunct jail or wherever.
Jails were always big. Jails and churches and cemeteries were just the creepiest places to work.
Absolutely. And
so time in them.
By terrestrial or secular definition, everybody thinks that there's a haunting, that there's a spiritual implication or remnant of some sort in the actual environment. But I began to wonder if when all of these departments come together, and it's really sad because whether it's a really well-known A-list actor who's using their craft to, at the very minimum, Sam, teach humanity to deal with human problems in a humanist host of solutions. See, that alone will get you a one-way ticket to hell. If you live your life dealing with your human problems with a humanist toolbox rather than a spiritual toolbox, a toolbox that leans on God, which is what he wants us to do, that alone is a separation from the Holy Spirit. Anyway, I began to believe that when we came together to craft these deceptions, maybe there's nothing spiritually imprinted in these environments. Maybe it's the 100 or 200 creative spirits coming together in this sort of cinematic conclave, if you will. Maybe we brought it with us. And I never put those pieces together while I was in the industry. I didn't start to analyze it that way until I left. And the last thing I'll say, and I'll hand it back to you, gentlemen, is
Tricky, I didn't even know the Shining Hotel was a real hotel. I didn't know that.
Last show I worked on, Superstore, I hated that show. I mean, I just dreaded going to work every day. This is again in the fall of 2015. One of the last episodes that we did, we were shooting on the side of the costume building on the back lot of Universal. It's the Edith Head building, and it's enormous. Property and costumes are in the same building, and I think the building is like 9 football fields or something like that of square footage. It's 4 stories, and it's just enormous. And I think it's the biggest prop house in America. And costumes is equally big. So we're on the side of that building, and construction's come out, and they've built a loading dock, and we're cheating it like the back of the Superstore that this host of characters work in, which is basically a Walmart. And the idea was some old man sits down on a sofa that's on sale, and he dies on the sofa. And now all the people that work at the Superstore are fighting over getting this sofa for an employee discount. And the manager of the store, who is this classic sort of Midwest kind of milk toast white guy, pot-bellied bumpkin, who of course is a regular church attendee, what Obama called a bitter clinger, clinging to his Bible and his gun type guy. And he was the butt of every joke in every script, but of course he's the Christian in the script. He comes outside and all the employees are fighting over the sofa on the loading dock. And at some point the sofa is ignited. Somebody comes along and lights it on fire to eliminate this problem. And I remember the director, we were shooting MOS, which is without sync sound. So the director could talk while the scene is up without messing up sound. And the director began to instruct talent to start praying, and I became very uncomfortable because that's not real prayer, that's fake prayer. So we've got it. So imagine it's 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock in the morning, back lot of Universal. We've got this full-size sofa on fire, big flames, 15 feet high, lots of accelerant keeping it going. And now we've got all these people who are not believers pretending to pray. The fire is making their faces glow in a very creepy, eerie manner. And then the director, and I'll remember this till the day I die, then he goes, hey, everybody, start speaking in tongues, speak in tongues. And at that moment, even though I was still backsliding to a significant degree, I just quietly left. I left set. And as the on-set dresser, as the name implies, on-set dresser, you're really not supposed to leave set. But even at that time, gentlemen, I was like, you know what? We just crossed over from spiritually questionable to straight up blasphemy. And I'm out of here. I didn't walk off the job, but I walked off the set, and I was gone for a good 20 minutes. And then it was only a couple days later that security removed me from that show. And it was strange. It was, I think, a Thursday or a Friday, and driving to work that morning, I had no idea that would be my last day after many thousands of days working in the industry. But hopefully, Sam, that gives you kind of an insider's view of some of the spiritual trickery.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really intense, and I applaud you both for being able to step up and walk off and leave that behind. It's definitely not easy. Everyone right now watching this show, imagine if you just quit your job right now and had no prospects on what you're going to do next and walked it. And I've heard you guys talk about you have to change your phone number, and that's cutting the cord because that means you can't get any more work. And just imagine doing that right now in your life, because it's what you're doing. It may be tied to satanic things, and obviously it is. And so just the amount of respect I have for you both to be able to do that, it's inspiring, and I hope people take that seriously as they go forward. And we're seeing in our culture now, to kind of make it more of a broader discussion, we're seeing in our culture, I just read a couple articles about how Hollywood is really starting to dig into these Christian films because people are hungry for God-centered films, and you can see that with the rising production value of many movies coming out now, and even Hollywood is diving into it. So what do you see their motive to be, and is that good or is that bad for our country and our culture?
Well, me personally, I had the opportunity to work on a film called Woodlawn, which was a story about a football player that grew up in the South, a black football player that was recruited by Bear Bryant. And there's a character that's played by Sean Astin, who also played Rudy in the movie Rudy, where he's a pastor and he's bringing this town together and through the grace of Jesus to overcome kind of racism. I worked on a movie called 90 Minutes in Heaven with Hayden Christensen and Kate Bosworth. Dwight Yoakam was on that film. Fred Thompson was on that film. I got to work with Michael W. Smith, who was also in that film. Here's what I would say is that I know, especially from a Disney point of view, Disney produced a lot of kind of family-friendly, with just kind of a watered-down version of Christianity. And my honest opinion of some of those movies is they are doing that, but strictly from a marketing and a making money point of view, because they understand demographics. And they know that there is a large segment of people that will not go see movies that are glorifying, premarital sex or witchcraft or, drug use, violence. There's a whole segment of people. So they're producing things that are palatable for that crowd as well. So, it's a trap that sometimes Christians will go to the movie theater, or they're paying for Netflix every month, but they don't understand exactly that their money is going into the same coffers and the same pockets as the people that are producing the vile anti-Christian garbage as well. And so you really have to have a discerning mind as to what you're actually spending your money on when it comes to Hollywood. So, like I said, with Disney, they produce plenty of stuff. ABC, Disney, that whole umbrella has produced plenty of things that we would consider absolutely anti-Christian, against God. But yet they're also going to put out these things at Christmas time, these movies that kind of have this spiritual flavor to them, and so people just really have to understand and dig into who's producing it, who's financing it. If you're really that concerned about not supporting this overall machine that is making the majority of their money by denigrating Christian values and morals. I worked on a ton of projects where, just like John was talking about, where, especially on a show like Superstition, where, it's a show that went straight into occult practices and mocking of God. I remember one of the scenes we shot was the female character in the show is on a cross shaped like in an X, and on the back side of that cross is a priest, and it's surrounded by 5 women dressed as witches in the shape of a pentagram, and there's blood on the floor, but yet I'm having to stand there and hold a camera or help light it to help make it look better. And so I just like John said, there were a lot of times where I risked my job security to walk away from certain things. And so as far as the Christian nature, it's far and few between. And even when you are working on a Christian production, and I did have a couple, like I said, a couple opportunities to work on things that were generally in that Christian family friendly category. It's the money and the production companies are the same companies that are producing the garbage as well, for the most part. And so it's a catch-22, because without that ability to go to work and sometimes film things or help film things that are just so distasteful. I mean, I worked on a show, Godless, and I remember having to do a scene where these 2 twin brothers in that show are committing rape against a young helpless female. And then I remember we filmed a child being hung up by a noose, as part of the show. And so you've got the process where you have the real actor, a child who's, being shown where they're putting the rope and the hanging noose around the neck. And then the actor has to act like he's being, yanked off the ground. And then you cut to a scene where it's a mannequin, a very lifelike looking mannequin. And so the viewing public doesn't see all of those things happen. But as a crew member, you're literally, you have the visual image of these things in your brain forever. You can never unsee them. And I mean, everything from murders, people being hacked up with, knives and shot, and I worked on All Eyes on Me, the total debauchery that Tupac Shakur was involved in with the different women he had in his life, and having to film those things. And a lot of times those type of scenes involving sex or nudity, those are sets. They basically kick a lot of the people off. But if you're the dolly grip pushing a camera dolly, you got to be right there.
Or the onset dresser.
Absolutely. You're standing there and you've got to take this in because it's your job. And so every day I would go home and I'd be like, Lord, please forgive me. Please forgive me, Lord, for being in this position where I have to do this to provide for my family. And it took me a while, and after that show Superstition, that was kind of the Damascus moment for me where I just said, I've had enough of this. And you talked about changing your phone number. I was at work on a Thursday, did not show up on Monday, and changed my phone number. And it's a big deal. It's a big deal because the only way you don't put your name in the classified ads to get work on a film set. It's who you know and who knows you, and what do they know about you from the word of mouth reputation that you've built for yourself. Because all it takes is a few people to say, no, that guy's a dirtbag. That guy, I don't like that guy. And they don't even have to give a reason. But if the right people put out the wrong message about you, you will not work. You might as well hang it up. And so it's a lot of, I used to say this a lot. Yes is the only acceptable answer in the film industry, because when you start saying no to a lot of people about anything, whether it's, can you do this? Can you, we need an explosion. Can you make it happen? Or we need this to happen. Can you make it happen? If you start getting hard to deal with and you start saying no a lot simply because it means you going above and beyond to make something happen, you're just not going to get called back. And so it's a lot of, yes, absolutely, we can do that. No problem. Yes, absolutely. And especially when you're talking with producers and directors and the talent, the talent can say things like, I remember one thing in particular working on Stranger Things, and I won't say her name, but the lead actress in the show Stranger Things, she's been around Hollywood for a long time. But I remember we were doing a scene where she was running from the front door of the house to a car that was about 10 feet from the front porch. And so we're filming at this kind of abandoned cabin out in the woods in South Atlanta. And she was concerned about tripping over a rock from the front porch to the car. So at literally like 3 o'clock in the morning, if you can imagine, 4 grown men on their hands and knees with flashlights looking for rocks that were not there and picking up, pebbles that were so small, the size of peas, to throw them out of her way so that she would not trip. But it was all just something in her mind. So there's a lot of things that would come out that maybe the talent would say, or the director would say, or the producer would say is hot. It's a requirement. We got to do this. And as a logical, critical thinker, you're sitting there like, what are they talking about? What are you talking about? There's no rocks there. Why are you worried about rocks? There's no rocks on the ground. I don't see a rock. There's no rocks there. But yet you can't have that attitude. It's, yes, ma'am, we'll get right on it, ma'am. Blah, 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 blah. And that's the attitude. And so doing that every single day in order to secure the next day's work mentally just ruined me. It just, and like John says, the thing that you saw as kind of the sizzle of everybody just, let's make this happen, let's work together and get it done. At the end of the road, I was just like, are you kidding me? I just dreaded coming to work and leaving my wife, and knowing that if once I got in that car to head to work and she calls me and says, hey, I'm broken down on the side of the road somewhere, knowing that if I said, hey, I need to leave because my wife has a flat tire, that might be the last day you ever work on that show. And so you start having to make these decisions like, do I tell my wife she's going to have to figure it out in order that I have a paycheck to keep the roof over her head? Or do I, and so it's those constant battles all day long. And that's just one.
Well, Bill, we're at about the 90-minute mark here. So I would suggest let's talk a little bit about the transition that you're going through and that I'm going through, because of course I'm still going through this transition as well. You don't escape what I call the golden handcuffs. I know Bill likes to call it the merry-go-round, and both are very applicable. But you don't escape a decade and a half in that environment overnight. You go through what Scripture tells us is a sanctification process, and of course we could do an entire show just on the meaning of that word sanctification, because particularly with Bill Chapman and myself, it's so applicable. But Bill, I know that we would be remiss if we didn't explain to viewers of the Sharpening Report that I've been out since September of 2015, and our stories are different in the sense that you had a defining moment where you decided, I'm out. I was removed from set by security, and they decided I was out. Now, I was blacklisted from Universal. That still left Disney, Paramount, Warner Brothers, Sony, and Fox. But in Hollywood, everybody talks. So in reality, you get blacklisted from one of the majors, you're in pretty deep trouble. So you could say that the decision I made was by default. But what I'd like to do is I'll take a moment to do this, and Bill, I'll pass it back to you. The transitional period, getting out of this incredibly magnetic, and it's a very, Sam, it's a very closed circuit environment. And by closed circuit, I mean, it's very much like the military in the sense that it's hard to describe exactly what it's like, but once you've been there, even for a short period of time, you get it right away. And what motivates so much of it is hypocrisy that is demonstrated through what we call political correctness, or some of the newer terms like identity politics or virtue signaling. These are the type things that sort of run the environment that Bill and myself escaped from. A good example would be the sexual harassment training that you're required to go through every year. Both Bill and myself are required to be current on a passport safety training program. And originally, we carried these little booklets around that actually looked like little miniature passports, and it's got your picture in it. And then you have to go get certified with these stamps for all kinds of things, like operating heavy equipment, operating firearms on set, operating in open flame environments, aerial rigging. All of these things, Sam, are qualifications. And so whether you're operating out of Atlanta or Los Angeles, you've got to be part of this training program. Well, commensurate to the passport safety training is also the sexual harassment and sensitivity training that you have to go through. And I know through ABC and Disney, which are the same company, or Warner Brothers, I went through the sexual harassment training twice with Disney and 3 times with Warner Brothers. And what I'd like to mention about that quickly is the first time I went through it with Disney, and the second to last time I went through it with Warner Brothers. The first time I went through sexual harassment training at Disney, Sam, the presentation that the lawyer gave us was basically about what you would expect. You know, be super careful and sensitive about the opposite sex. It started off with, you know, don't make inappropriate comments, but it's really carried over now to you can't even tell somebody, wow, those are cool shoes. You know, it's really gone like off the reservation as far as I would argue detracting from normal human interaction, but I would even extrapolate that out to Satan's plan of demolishing and fragmenting the nuclear family. And Hollywood is a big, so behind the camera, behind the stage doors that 99.9% of the content consumers never see, we are instructed to behave in a manner that is totally antithetical. It's 180 degrees off the mark from what we produce and amplify out to the world. And that's a very strange place to exist, because you talk about hypocrisy. I mean, you feel like a hypocrite in capital letters. So the first sexual harassment training I went through was on Alias at Disney, probably 2003. And what I remember about that is after we watched a couple videos that were these cheesy little public service announcement type productions that that demonstrated how you're not supposed to behave on set. The last video, Sam, was of two women at a jewelry counter, like they work at a jewelry store. And I remember it was kind of comedic because the display cases that they used were clearly these display cases that we pulled out of the Disney prop house numerous times. So they shot it somewhere there on the lot. But anyway, it's these two kind of middle-aged women working behind a jewelry counter. And one of them looks at the other one and says, how are you today, Sue? And she's like, oh, Jane, I'm fine. Thank you for asking. And she's like, well, Tom and I went to church yesterday, and it was just such a positive sermon. If you'd ever like to come, we'd really love to have you. And then the lady says, oh, well, Sue, thank you, but I think I'll pass. And she's like, okay, well, I'll be praying for you. They married that together with sexual harassment training to indicate to us that you will not proselytize on set, and that if you choose to do so, that they're going to handle that legally the same as they would sexual harassment. So you can see how difficult it is to even know how to comport yourself when you're in that type of environment where you're kind of trying to go north and south at the same time. The more pronounced example would be on Pretty Little Liars season 3. We were taken over to stage 8. We were shooting on stage 7. We went to lunch, and then we came back, and we were back in on stage 8, where we listened to an attorney go through an hour of the do's and don'ts. And I kid you not, Sam, once that little meeting was over, there were probably 150 of us sitting there. They brought in bleachers to an empty stage, and this lady gave her speech. We went back to stage 7 and shot a multiple participant lesbian love scene in one of the Pretty Little Liars, in one of the 4 primaries' bedrooms, where these girls are rolling around on this bed, making out, tugging at each other's hair, etc. And of course, as Bill indicated a moment ago, they'll close the set for something like that. So instead of having 35 or 40 people standing around, you've got maybe 8 or 10. But somebody made a mistake. They didn't close the set. And I'm not kidding you. The accountants were there. The construction foreman was there. The transportation captains there. People who are typically offset and have nothing to do with the camera work. They're all standing around to view this or to absorb it. So that's the kind of hypocrisy that we worked in. And then it translated to me as a man. It became very difficult. I've said this publicly a few times, but the last couple of years I was in, I felt like a walking civil war. I was doing programs like the Hagman Report and Caravan to Midnight, Josh Tolley Show, etc., whistleblowing on something we've really just scraped the surface of today, which is the actual Luciferian occultic practices that through things like Ordo Templi Orientis and Scientology and back in the 70s, the Process Church, they are like a nucleus of Hollywood production. That's probably another show for another time if we really want to dive deep on that. But I was beginning to do some pretty decent shows about this, and yet at the same time, I'd do a big Hagman Report show on, let's say, a Wednesday night, and then Thursday I'd get up and go right back to Sony or Universal or wherever. So on one side of the studio gate, I felt like a total hypocrite, and on the other side of the studio gate, I felt like a turncoat, because these people were still paying my rent and putting bread on the table. And I was always careful. You have to sign NDAs. You have to sign non-disclosure agreements, especially if you're going to work with the shooting company. So you need to honor those, because they will sue you into oblivion if you don't. So I was always careful, as I have been today. I haven't named a single name today. And I know that drives listeners and viewers kind of crazy, but there's a specific purpose for that, which is I'm not here to malign or besmirch anybody by name. These people are lost just like I was. But I'm here to try to explain how the overall monster works. And by way of my final comments for today, gentlemen, I want to talk for a moment, as I said, about the transition. The most frightening thing for me was knowing who I am, who the man in the mirror is. I didn't graduate high school. I left high school when I was 17 with a 3.5, but I was living on my own, paying rent at 17. I got in the restaurant business, got involved with people a lot older than me, and just kind of quit going to school. So I never went through graduation, no high school diploma, went to college, but but really didn't have much of a talent stack outside of media. And in 2013, 2014, when I began to realize that my time in feature film and television production was going to be limited, the new media did not exist really.
I don't know what a Wendy burger is, but apparently, yeah, they're opening up 200 stores here. I don't know what it is. I thought Wendy's was an ice cream chain.
As a viable resource where you could actually come in and do the job that I do today and make enough money to make a modest living.
No way.
Back then, there was pretty much InfoWars. The Hagman Report was brand new. I'm not sure Sharpening Report existed yet. So Satan will use fear. It's one of his primary motivators, because we know Hebrews 11:1 is my favorite scripture in the Bible. And Hebrews 11:1, of course, tells us that faith is the substance of all things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And I love that scripture because it indicates that fear and faith really cannot coexist. That's a light, dark, or oil, water type of relationship. There's no symbiosis there at all. You're either motivated from fear or you're motivated from faith. And from my personal experience, that would be, by spiritual definition, gentlemen, the thesis, if you will, or to what the last 2.5 years have been like. Learning to be motivated by faith rather than fear, because Bill, as you indicated in your comments a few moments ago, yes is the answer on set. And everybody hustles on set because they are afraid of losing their job. So I would argue that much of this massive motivation that it takes to bring, 100 or 200 people together who are all very job specific, very task specific, and get them to all work together like a finely tuned Swiss watch. Something's got to motivate them, and it's really not faith. It's to a great extent fear motivated. So for myself personally, gentlemen, from that time in 2015, and it really began in 2014 when I went to the Whitestone Conference and got baptized there, God began to work on me to replace the fear motivator with a faith motivator. And I am still going through that process today. And I wake up every day. Some days are harder than others, but I feel truly blessed to be on that path, to know that like Jesus said, if you're faithful in these little teeny tiny things, then I'll make you faithful in greater things still, and greater things yet to come. Sam, I remember about 6 months after I got booted out of the film industry, I was very, very blessed because I had an enormous cyst under my right kneecap, and I was able to get state disability. So I didn't have that white knuckle moment of like, oh my goodness, I have no income at all. I was able to decompress a little bit, went to some conferences, moved around the country a little bit, and while my knee healed. I had an enormous, it looked like I had a ping pong ball growing out of my kneecap. So during that period, God was working on me every day and really every moment. And I remember my dad, we were driving home from a baseball game, and he was like, son, what are you going to do? Are you starting to feel a little nervous? Are you starting to feel a little stressed? You've been out of Hollywood for about 8-9 months now, and the disability thing's not going to last forever. And he was exactly right. I remember this conversation very well. I went back to my hotel that night, and I remember I wrote it down on a piece of paper. Lord, I have faith, but please show me a direction soon because the resources are going to run out, And he always placed in me the reminder to keep working, to keep carrying water, be faithful, get up every day, get your empty bucket, go over to the source, fill it up, take it where the Lord leads.
Yeah, Cactus, I've heard him give Copeland a rap, and I've also heard him give the Pope a rap. So Paul Begley is very dangerous.
Dump it out, and if there's time remaining in the day, repeat the process. And that's what I do to this day as the producer of the Hagman Report. It's an enormous responsibility to examine the news cycle, talk to the pastors and the mentors that I'm blessed to know, talk with people like Bill, and begin to formulate, okay, here's what's happening in the world. This is the Rolodex of people we know. We need to marry these things together and bring a 3-hour production Monday through Friday to hundreds of thousands of people. And then, of course, Joe Hagman and I do the Hagman Daily Show Monday through Friday as well. So I've got a co-host responsibility and a producing responsibility. But what makes it manageable, Sam and Bill, is remembering every day that all glory goes to the Lord, that we are all clay on the potter's wheel for sure. And that regardless of whether you're starting off a podcast for $49 a month with Blog Talk Radio and you don't even have a microphone yet and you're operating off a 7-year-old PC, and you've got 5 listeners and you know who 3 of them are, whether you're there or whether you're working for the Hagman Report or True News or InfoWars, as long as you're playing the position that the Lord designed for you, then you're on the path that you need to be on. And I think about this every day, guys. It really is like carrying water. We have this enormous amount of truth. We have veracity over here. And then we have the fake stream media lies and deception that are corrupting our world to the point where we're going to smack into an intersection where it's going to be like a spiritual gridlock. And I think we're approaching it very quickly. Yeah. What I mean by that is the beast tech system is coming. All of the IT already exists. It's just the politics, the cultural acceptance is catching up to that IT. And it's happening right now. So,
and guys, this is 5 years old. So we're 5 years more advanced with that now.
So we as believers need to really begin to accept with humility in our hearts that this is no longer a spectator sport. This is not about front row seats to the big game or ringside seats to the big brawl. It's time to saddle for battle and get in your position. And the only way that you can get in your position is to submit to the Lord, because you don't know your position, but he does. And that's why I love Hebrews 11:1 so much. Again, faith is the substance of all things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And I'll conclude by saying this, and Bill, I'll hand it back to you, brother. In 2011 and 2012, I did what a lot of men do. I realized that under the Obama administration, we were printing money around the clock. We had, like H1N1 type news coming out all the time. We were starting to see these weird, almost zombie diseases coming out of Africa, the militarized police, the arming of civilian law enforcement in a paramilitary fashion. Being a amateur historian myself, I could see so many similarities to 1930s emergence of Nazism in Germany compared to what we're seeing right now in our country today, perhaps with a little bit of respite in the President Trump era. But again, back in 2011, 2012, these were frightening times. And I did what a lot of men do. I started buying guns. I started buying silver. I started buying storable food. It looked like we could be really sliding down a deep, dark hole very quickly. And of course, back then we didn't know anything about Donald Trump or that we would get this, what I believe is almost a Cyrus-like respite. But I digress. My final point, gentlemen, is simply this. I can remember walking around on the streets of Pasadena, California, and I would listen to the Hagman Report on my first iPhone, like an iPhone 3. And I would listen to Doug and Joe Hagman. This is back in the early days of the show. And I couldn't understand why I even listened to these guys. It was kind of this folding card table and a couple of over-the-counter mics type shows. It would drop off air sometimes. But there was something that kept attracting me to this. And I didn't know it at the time, but what it was the Lord had enabled me to feel the vacancy, that absence that's within each of us. It's like a missing puzzle piece that only he can fill. And I think a lot of us in the Patriot movement and the Liberty movement, the Truth movement, the Remnant Church, we're all looking to fill that empty space. And I've been around the campfire long enough. I've seen people fill it with everything from workaholic habits to dusting a few bottles of wine every night and still being a very viable member of this Remnant Church community. I began to pray these really short, simple prayers. And I would actually stop. I would pause my iPhone mid Hagman Report. I would look up in the night sky and I would be like, Lord, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know something's going to happen. I don't know who's in charge, because clearly Obama's not in charge, but I know that ultimately you're in charge, Father God. And this was the hardest thing for me to do because I was so willful, guys. But I couldn't do it on my own. I had to take it to the Lord and say, Lord, I want to be a more humble spirit before you, and then by consequence before everyone else. And I had this weird feeling, gentlemen, that the Lord was going to do something pretty significant with me, but I had no clue what it was. No clue. Now, this is at a time where I had never even been a guest on any of these programs yet, let alone have a couple of years of producing at this point. And the most important critical thing, more than building a Rolodex or producing the Hagman Report or any of these remarkable things, speaking at these big conferences, more so than any of that, the most important tool that the Lord led me to, and I'm so grateful that he gave me the courage to utilize the tool, was to humble myself before him and say, place me where you would have me go, and then give me the strength and courage to work once you get me there, Lord. And that was the start point. And it would take far too much time than we have today to map out all of the way stations along the way. But I left Hollywood. I reduced my overhead by many thousands of dollars a month, and I went and lived in basically kind of a combination of a tent and a shack about 25, 30 yards behind my mom's house in the middle of nowhere in northern Washington state, up near the Straits of San Juan de Fuca. And it was a very strange lifestyle. I went from this beautiful Spanish style apartment in Pasadena to literally kind of living like in a shack. I had extension cords running from my mom's house out to give me power. And I lived that way for a little bit over a year. And there was, and I guess I'm saying that to say this, that coming out of Hollywood, the Lord made it clear. It's like he said, John, I love you enough. I will show you, like you're in the middle of the swamp, John, and you need to get out of the swamp. So I will show you the next lily pad, but it is up to you to trust me to jump to that next lily pad. However, back to Hebrews 11:1, I am not going to map out the entire chain of lily pads that takes you out of the swamp. You're going to need to exercise that faith tool and jump from one to the next to the next. And in closing, I'll just encourage anyone who is listening to this or viewing this on YouTube and joining the Sharpening Report. Myself and Bill Chapman both are more than willing to directly talk to anybody who's in entertainment. We've got an enormous project. We'll talk about that at a later date. But there are team members from the Hagman Report, from WorldNet Daily, and some of the other platforms who are coming together in a collaborative effort. We have a big project that's going to drop in the spring, early summer. And we really want to speak with people who are in the entertainment industry and want to come out. I believe, Sam and Bill, it's been really incumbent on my heart that God is going to bring an exodus of people out of film and television, music video production, commercial production, etc. Because I know the type of people that are in it, and they're amazing people. They're so dynamic, so capable, talent stacks that you wouldn't believe. But like I was, they're lost. Sam, with your permission, I'm going to give out my email and Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. So I can be reached at robertsonjohn@gmail. It's ROBBERSONJON@gmail.com. Please note something about Hollywood or film production in the subject line. Because I produce the Hagman Report, I get just an enormous amount of email every day, and I truly want to prioritize email from anybody. I don't care if you're working in Toronto, Vancouver, Rome, London, New York, Hollywood, wherever you're at. If you're working in production, please contact me. I'll get you in touch with Bill. I think he'll drop his contact information as well. Also, I can be contacted on Twitter. I can be DM'd. I keep the DM open. And that's just, again, it's Robertson John at Robertson John on Twitter. I know, I'll make this my final remark. I know that somebody's going to hear this who needs to either speak with me or speak with Bill. And we're here for you. Neither of us believe in like any kind of quasi-celebrity status. We do our best to remain directly in contact with people, although we're both busy. But it's important to us to support you, particularly, again, if you're coming out of the production environment. And Sam, I just want to thank you so much for your hospitality and giving us the amount of time that you did today on the Sharpening Report. It's my first time on, and I had fun. Thank you, Sam.
Absolutely, it's a pleasure. Bill, do you have any closing statements that you want to speak?
Yeah, I'll be pretty brief. When I decided to get out of the film industry in November, early November of 2017, I was in a world of hurt, spiritually, trying to put together a marriage that I intentionally, through my own selfishness, had crippled practically, and it's hanging on a thin thread, and allowing a lot of things like the industry, the time apart, the temptations that are there. I was using drugs, mainly marijuana, but there were other temptations there to use prescription pills that are rampant among industry members, cocaine, all types of things that are out there that people use to get through this process of getting up and going to work every day. I'd allowed a lot of those things to take a hold in my life. And this moment, this Damascus moment in end of October, early November of 2017, working on this show that I knew in my heart was just so satanic in nature, God just did something inside of me that I literally cannot explain, where it was just I couldn't speak in a discernible or an understandable tone of voice. I just was a mess. I literally was a real mess, and people around me thought there's something wrong with this guy. There's something wrong with this guy. But I made the decision to leave the industry, and my brother, my younger brother, said, I want you to get out of Atlanta. You got to get away from the influence. You got to get away from the noise. You need to rest, and you need to recuperate mentally, physically, spiritually. I want you to come up to live with me for a little while and just get away from everything. And so I left Atlanta, changed my phone number. I come up to his house in New Hampshire, and I move into the room of my little nephew, where I'm recording from right now. We're talking right now in my little makeshift studio, and every single day it's been about getting healthy, spending time alone with the Lord. And in my boredom, really, more than anything, I got on Twitter. I mean, there's no television here at the house, and so I wasn't watching news. And I really just got on Twitter so that I could stay up to date with what's going on in the world. And gradually, I began to post things about coming out of Hollywood and talking about, a new life, and that God was working on me, and I began to attract some followers. And then eventually I did a Periscope, and just basically bared my heart, talked about, the mistakes that I had made in my own life, that God will use the broken, and to do miraculous kingdom that we can't even fathom. And I literally felt like coming from being a best boy grip and a dolly grip and in charge of a crew of men, to literally having nothing to do all day to really bide my time except read the word, try and communicate what God is sharing in my own life with other people via this social media platform. Things began to build, and like I said, I drew the attention of Stephen Menking on The Objective, and that kind of led to my relationship with John. And so from all of that, God has begun to open up doors into this whole other kind of career field, where I'm not spending all day on set surrounded by debauchery and these people that are producing things that are antithetical to the good news and the gospel of Jesus Christ. I'm able to just sit and write articles, take information that I find truth, and pass it on my Twitter, have these conversations via podcasts with John and Stephen and now yourself. And it's a whole new world that God is leading me through baby steps and teaching me things as simple as just being patient, to wait on his timing. And so I've been up here for a few months and really worried about how am I going to provide for my family. And God has taken this situation that I walked into knowingly and then walked out of simply on faith of just saying, I'm going to get out, Lord. I don't know what tomorrow is, but I'm going to just be obedient and let you handle the consequences. I've learned how to be patient. I've learned how to get up every day and just like with my hands open, just like this, with my hands open, Lord, I can't do anything for myself. And whatever you decide to hand me today, I am going to be thankful for, whether that is a meal, the fact that I have a roof over my head, or it's going to be a tweet from somebody that says, Bill, thank you for sharing truth with me. You're a blessing in my life, and your testimony has ministered to me. And it's those little things, rather than having this focus of I'm in Hollywood and I work for Jerry Bruckheimer, or I did this movie, and having this inflated sense of self-worth that's based on the production of lies and deceit, to just being humble and low in spirit and saying, Lord, lead me. I've messed up my life by trying to drive the car myself. I'm literally going to stop holding the wheel. It's yours now. And no matter what happens, Lord, I know that you have all these steps, the lily pads, as John referred to them. You know where they're all at. And we're not in the why or the how business. Once you decide to turn your life over 100% to Jesus and to the Lord Almighty, you're not in the how and why business anymore. You're just you're kind of in the yes business, like, the film business. It's just your job to say, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord, yes, Lord. And that's a great worship chorus, by the way. Yes, Lord, yes, Lord. But that's really all I would say, is that this has been a transition for me. The future is bright. I'm excited about going to this conference, and I will give out my contact information. It's really simple. It's chap151@yahoo.com. That's the first four letters, my last name, the number 151 @yahoo.com. And you can reach me on Twitter at bchapman, at bchapman151. And I would love to talk to anybody that's in the film industry. There's no formula, just like there's no formula for getting in. People used to ask me all the time, how did you get in the film industry? And after a few years, I was like, you know what? I forgot. And now I just want to know how to get out. I want to know how to get out of the film industry. And what I would tell people is that there is a way, and it is going to be specific to your.
Chris, you should come on the side I go on, Christians debate Muslims, and you should come on and join me, and we can gang up on them. It's good fun.
Situation, but the number one thing is if you're feeling that leading.
Okay, Trudy, good night, mate. God bless.
God's telling you to act, and just like John said, it is go time. It's not 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We are on the cusp of something in our society and in our world. The amount of things happening just day to day, whether it be social media.
And this is 5 years old, so imagine what he thinks now. Okay, this one's over, guys. I'll finish with one more. And it goes for 23 minutes and I'm out, guys.
My neighbour's a lawyer.
I'm sure she's good.
Everyone's full of advice.
I was talking about in the previous video. Plant closures, power, of course, outages, and now we have weather once again, folks, in the exact same area as what I was talking about in the previous video, and something I covered back in June, mid-June. All right, you're going to be pretty surprised by what's going on. This is Tony. Hope you're all doing well. Let me show you a picture of what I'm referring to. Look at this. This is the latest weather. Look at this. This is a storm that is 10 states large. Okay. This is the second time. Now, I thought it looked a little strange. I was thinking, well, maybe I'm just thinking it's strange. maybe I'm just thinking it's strange. It's not really that strange. But actually, I started looking into it, and apparently it is very, very, very unusual because we have the first of something that hasn't happened for 73 years this month as a result of that. And I'm going to show you that in a little bit as well. On top of the fact that we have 1.1 million people without power at the exact same time right now. And that's what happened back in June as well. It was in a very similar area. And as I just showed you in my previous video, we have this shakings, unexplained shakings, just before this all happened in the exact same area. So what's going on with this? It just seems a little bit unusual to me that we have the same thing, or not the same thing, but multiple things happening in the same area over and over and over. And then I saw an article that really threw me through a loop that I'm going to show you right now. Let's see if I can find that really quick. I got lots of them, actually. I have lots of articles to show you, but yeah, here it is. This one was really interesting. Okay, check this out. This is from a CEO. And I should lead into this because.
Okay, from here, I can see one of the books.
It's really interesting. So we have home insurance is going up ridiculous. Now that relates and ties to weather, right?
The flood.
Look at what this guy says. This is really, really strange. Sure. Home buyers aren't taking climate change seriously, says Redfin CEO. Then he says down here, the most affordable places in America are the places at the most risk of being affected by climate change. Now, just think about that for a sec. Where's the most affordable places in America, folks?
No idea.
It's the area I was just showing you. Literally, the area where I was just showing you is the most affordable places to live in America, right here. Very, very low cost of living in this area. And he's saying that is the area that's going to be affected by climate change. What does he mean by climate change? He means weather. He means problems with the weather. And what are we seeing over and over and over in this one area? How is it why would you even come out with an article like this or a talk like this? It doesn't even make sense. How would you know climate change is
I bet he's going to harp with this one. I bet he's going to harp.
Going to affect the cheaper areas. How would you even know that? Right? That's one. Two, why would you even think about that? Right? You would assume that climate change would affect more of a large area, not just one specific area, right? And I've seen articles as well that was saying that the Bay Area is going to be affected only, like a specific section of the Bay Area in California. So the Bay Area is in a city. It's a section of a city, San Francisco Bay Area, and then they said a section of the Bay Area in San Francisco. So like you got the
glaring up, guys. I'm trying to get focus back.
A section of the city, and then you got a smaller area in the section of the city, and they say this one little area here, this one little dot, is going to be affected by climate change. Does that even make any sense? This literally makes no sense. How would they be able to? They can't even predict the weather the next day always accurately. How would they know 10 years down the road that one little dot there is going to be affected? Unless someone is pushing some buttons and doing something and knows where they're going to put something happening, right? Just a thought in my head. I'm not saying that's what's happening. We don't know what's happening. It could be just all weird coincidence that multiple times in a row, this one area keeps getting, weird shakings and storms over and over. 10 statewide storms. Kind of strange, if you ask me. So like I said, we're going to be getting tons of stuff in this realm. And of course, this affects cost of living in those areas. It makes it go much higher. And then when they do this, it makes people stop leaving places like California to go to these cheap areas. You see what I'm getting at? So it's almost like they're trying to stop people from going to certain areas by making it hard to live there, right? And so what I'm trying to get at is they're actually increasing the costs of property insurance as a result of things like this. Property insurance going up or away for many in Florida. Okay, that's one example because they're dealing with a lot of weather as well and inflation at the exact same time. We have inflation now is going to be spiking up again. according to this latest
One of the
article.
books says pre-flood.
They're trying to tell us inflation is over, but actually the graphs are saying the opposite, that it's going to shoot back up again. Inflation is about to come back with a vengeance. Okay, they've been trying to say it's over, but it's not. So we're seeing stories like that as well coming out. Here's another one saying pretty much the same idea. Summer warns of inflation reacceleration risk with too hot wage growth. Wages are not growing whatsoever. So it's kind of hilarious. I mean, if they went up a little bit, it's a miracle because it's clearly not keeping up with inflation whatsoever, right? Wage growth has been pretty much sideways for 20 years. I mean, I remember my dad telling me it was like the late 80s, he was making $40,000 a year. Like back in like the 80s, okay? And he was a mechanic working, well, he was sort of a special mechanic. He worked with the engineers on building the new test cars, or the model cars, the new model ones. So he literally built it from the ground up with the other mechanics. But so he's probably paid more than the average, Joe or whatever that was a mechanic. But 40,000, like even today, a mechanic probably makes about 40,000, or maybe 50 or 60. I don't know what they make now, but I don't think it's much different. And it's like 40 years later, right? It's not much different. And the inflation is way, I mean, probably 4 times the price for stuff now than there was back in the age of maybe 10 times. I don't even know what it is. It's much higher. But anyway, you get the idea. So let's get back to some of what I was trying to get at. So we're going to be getting into a lot of stuff, like I said in this video.
Okay, and he's got a blue YouTube thing there. I don't understand why it's blue, but you're right. I think that's an award. And the other books, I can't make out the titles.
I want to kind of go across the board. We have here Justin. This just shows you kind of the sci-fi movie we live in, the Twilight Zone we live in. All these things are happening around us that don't make sense. It's like, 2017, we entered into some other realm, right? And here you have Justin going to the Barbie movie, Team Barbie film.
I think Mr. T died recently. I'm not sure though.
Folks, this is the kind of world we live in now. Okay, it's like that movie Idiocracy, where you got like the WWE guy for the Prez or something. It makes literally no sense. Our world makes no sense anymore. But like I said, we're going to be getting into what's going on with this weather and much more, and also what's going on with some other things that are pretty big. It has to.
Oh, it's the new Breeder's Choice Plus Ginger. Choose better. Choose Ginger.
Push, push, push.
Style your bedroom and save with 20 to 50% off everything at Bedshed.
Has to do with what the World, Economic, of course, Forum has been saying. It just happens to fit into this perfectly, and actually much more. But before we do so, I've got to mention Food Supply, 25-year shelf life. Link is in the description. $127 for 2 weeks worth, $5.97 for 3 months worth. You spend this much already in Kroger in 1 month for even a small family at this point, folks. This is the same price from 4 years ago. They have not. All the stuff that I sell hasn't increased with inflation. If anything, it's went down in price in some cases. This actually went down. I think 3 years ago, this was like $800 for the same exact thing. So you're going to definitely want to get this if you haven't already, folks. Link is in the description. Considering all the stuff going on around us, also this book here, The Lost Ways, it's only $30-some. Get the printed version. Hundreds of pages illustrated how to live without electricity, considering all the wonderful things going on around us. No sarcasm. Might want to get this book just in case. Link is in the description for that as well. And of course, my website, GR Videos. Link is in the description for that. Also, I don't even know where I went. I had it open. But I'm adding some new videos today. I'm going to be focusing on doing an exclusive set of videos, like a what do you call it? Series of videos over there, where I just talk about probably things I can't really, talk about over here.
Oh, okay,
so
still with
a lot
us.
of that over there. I'm going to be putting.
Did you see a photo of him die? He's really old and shriveled now, isn't he?
A lot more exclusive content over on my website, GR Videos. Link is in the description. Also, anything that's not over here anymore is going to be over there, or is already over there. Link is in the description, and most of it's in the membership section, but you can get some of it in the free section as well. I even have a little bit of exclusive content in the free section. This here's exclusive. This one's exclusive. So, I mean, I have them here and there. I have exclusive content even in the free section. I have a lot more in the membership section. And there's some more down here as well that's exclusive. Link is in the description for that. Let's get back to the video. So, what's interesting is I've noticed some really strange things happen since, I would say, the 90s. I'm not exactly sure when it came in. Probably in the early 2000s they started doing this. But I remember I took classes in pollution. I went to college for mechanical engineering. I focused on power plant technology. That was one of my focuses. I took a class in pollution. And when I studied pollution, they never talked about CO2. Now CO2 is the worst pollutant. But back then, we only talked about NOx and hydrocarbons. So long story short, I think they actually have changed what it means to save the environment. And actually, they're almost going the exact opposite direction now. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. And honestly, I feel like it's like this movie. It reminded me of this movie, The Matrix, where they talked about scorching the sky, because we actually have articles that have come out where our wonderful, beloved Prez has said he wanted to block, of course, the sun. You can see it literally right here. They literally want to block it. Okay, they want to block the sun. They want to stop CO2, which is what you breathe out and what I breathe out. They're getting rid of cows, literally getting rid of cows because of the climate. So to save the environment,
they want net zero carbon. What's that even mean? Net zero carbon. We're made of carbon, so what does that even mean?
We're putting less CO2 out, which is actually making CO2 actually makes the Earth more green, according to a NASA study. So we're actually going to make the Earth less green with less CO2. We're also going to have less sunlight, which would make it even lesser green. And this would also make it to be where there's less animals. And already, again, as I did in a previous video, we have 65% less animals in conservations where no human activity is at. In America, where they have literally 65% less animals. Why? Oh, the climate change? Does that even make sense? It's back in the old days, it made sense. Yeah, let's stop NOx. Let's stop hydrocarbons. It pollutes the atmosphere. It makes perfect sense. Let's do less of that. Now it's been like changed into something else. Now we're talking about no breathing and get rid of cows and let's stop the sun. Does this make any sense? This is not saving the environment. Okay? Saving the environment makes sense when you're trying to stop pollution, not when you're trying to stop the sun. Right? Doesn't that make sense? I hope I'm making some sense. But I mean, I was thinking of like the extreme end of this. Like the movie the first Matrix movie with Keanu Reeves, 1999, they talked about how the sky was scorched. And now there's no sunlight getting through. Clearly, you can imagine there's probably not very many plants, or if any are left, as a result of that. But of course, you can see it even in the Matrix Revolutions. They actually got through it. And you go to the top and it looks normal. It's like sunny and everything, but it's above the clouds, which of course there's no plant life underneath. And of course, in movies we've seen in the past where movies tend to actually predict, the future. Could this be an example of that? I don't know. It sounds kind of like a place for Dracula. Not humans, not animals, not maybe some of these unidentified, of course, objects could live in that. I don't know. Maybe it's AI. I don't know what's going on here, folks. I'm just talking about this.
Wow.
It seems very strange to me, all this stuff. You had recently these hearings before representatives talking about unidentified, of course, objects. And seemingly they want us to know about this now. What's curious, of course, is that maybe it's our own technology, or maybe we've procured it somehow. As you can see here with this History Channel video, you can see here an object on a supercarrier that clearly is not a normal jet. And could they be using such advanced technology to be doing things, some of the stuff I'm talking about so far in this video? That's a good question. I don't know. And of course, also, we've had lots of movies about this particular topic, like Independence Day with Will Smith, or maybe you've seen Mars Attacks, or that was actually a comedy. But movies that essentially every time they ever talk about these type of beings, they're never friendly. You know what I mean? But at any rate, but this is what we're seeing around us now. And what's interesting, I found this article from 10 years ago. Climate, of course, as you can see here, intelligence, agency, CI, of course, A, is now funding research into changing the climate. Oh, isn't that nice? Oh, thank you very much. Ooh. Yay, let's fix the climate so we can look like the Matrix, right? I don't know what, this was 10 years ago.
Good night, rock and roll.
This was 10
Good
years
to
ago.
see you
Look
again.
what's happened of recent. It makes you wonder about this recent weather, all in these southern eastern states, all these things happening multiple times that don't make sense in this area. Again, let me show you the article from June. Let me show you this. This is from June. Look how big that is. That's one storm. And then there was one in July. I drove through it. I drove from Indiana to Tennessee. The entire way was nonstop rain. Almost literally the entire way. Like one massive long rainstorm from Indiana to Tennessee, which would be, and this is way bigger, but it'd be like this, something like that. I don't know. Something not this big, obviously, but you get the point. That was in July. So we had June, we had July, and now we have August. And what's really interesting.
Hi, Beth. At least I got a great deal on my LDV.
Get the 160 kilowatt 2023 L.
Interesting about the August one is we have a world record now. Let me show you that in a second here. So you can see here, this is August one. This is the August one. Why does this keep happening over and over? And then on top of that, we had the weird shakings a few days ago, or it was about a week ago, or actually a few days ago, something like that. Let me show you the world record one. Where is that at? Okay, so it had to do with twisters. All right. We have a lot this time, just like we did back in June. And apparently, this is the first one since 1950 of this magnitude in Tennessee. Knoxville, Tennessee. They had first on record touches down Knox County. And this isn't referring to a record in Knox County. This is referring to a record in America. Okay, America. First of that magnitude to touch down in the month of August since at least 1950. According to the National Weather Service, keeping track of these things of that magnitude. So it's been 73 years since they had one of that magnitude in August. This is pretty late into it. You see what I'm getting at? So this is not what we would call normal. This is not normal. So we're seeing this happening, things happening in this exact same region multiple times.
Thanks for the links.
And it's making me scratch my head. What's going on here? Why does this keep happening? Is this natural? I don't think so. At least that's my opinion about it. I don't really feel like it's natural. It seems a little too odd to be natural. I don't know what you guys think about it. Maybe you think it's normal. But like I said, we have much more to cover in this video besides this. But that was sort of the main important thing to cover. But what's really interesting is we also have the World, Economic, of course, Forum. And there's a reason why I talk this way, folks. They put out an article, Energy Transition, getting our grids, of course, fighting fit for an electrified future. August 3rd, it was put out. And what is this all about? Let's look at what they say here. And it always has climate change involved, folks. Energy security worldwide. Accelerated decarbonization. So this is talking about pollution, getting rid of pollution. But while the generation of clean energy is important, digitizing and expanding our electricity grids is also vital for green transition.
Okay, Chris.
I didn't even mention this over my business
God bless,
channel.
mate.
I'm going to mention something here because I actually got into a number of other stories on my business channel that had to do with like the economy, inflation, and business. There's a bunch of companies going out of business. The biggest trucking company just went out of business, Yellow. 30,000 people without a job. there's a bunch of other huge stories going on in the economy. Inflation is going to spike soon again, by the way. It's not over. That's another thing I cover on my business channel. But getting into this, okay, so why are they trying to expand this whole idea of clean energy? Only with smarter, digitized, expanded energy grids will we create a decarbonized, resilient, and secure electrical network. So it really made me think of this song. I think it's Tears for Fears. Is it Tears for Fears? Everybody wants to rule the world. Let me just look it up, make sure I'm right. Just one sec. Everybody, I'm sure you heard it. Everybody wants to rule the world, right? Tears for Fears, right? I was right. So, of course, this is a very famous song. Probably everybody watching this video knows about this song. I'm sure you do if you live in America, especially.